I may keep y'all waiting.
I think I'm right there with you.
Yeah, I was wondering.
That's all right. Us youngsters, we're patient, aren't we, guys?
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, Troy, you and the youngsters.
Oh, you young kids, you have no appreciation for what we go through.
Oh, God.
Director Tisdale, did you walk back and forth 2 miles uphill both ways
Yes.
in the snow to school?
In the snow. In the snow.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Damn right I did, young whippersnapper. That's right. But God, I did.
And he smoked a pipe the whole time.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what gave me good lungs. is
Can
that
you see a
exercise.
7-year-old smoking a pipe on the way to school? Yeah.
Mhm.
Did you start with corncob pipes?
And a button nose.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and 2 eyes made out of coal.
There you go.
Chair, it's Tishray. Are you ready for me to start the webinar?
She's like, yes, please do.
Okay, I'm going to start it now.
All right. Good evening. I will now call to order the Tuesday, March 9th RTD Special Board Meeting to order. We are convened as of 5:30 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time, and I would respectfully ask everyone to remain muted unless you are recognized to speak. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and please note that under the current circumstances, the official meetings of the RTD Board of Directors are being held remotely in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare. For the immediate future, the official meetings of the Board of Directors will be held via Zoom and will be audio and video recorded. The meeting recordings, along with the unofficial minutes of the meetings, will be posted as soon as practicable in the board's website. You can visit rtd-denver.com, and a live stream of this meeting will also be available via RTD's YouTube page. Directors and members of staff, for the sake of the record, if you would like to be acknowledged during tonight's proceedings, I would ask for you to please raise your hand and wait for to call on you before proceeding to speak. Speaking out of turn will only add confusion to the record and to the proceedings. If any of tonight's attendees would like to engage with the board during public participation portion of the agenda, I'll ask you to raise your virtual hand as well, and you will be called on at the appropriate time. For anyone participating by phone, you can indicate that you would like to speak by pressing *9. To toggle your mute setting on the phone, press *6. Now, I would just like to make a civility statement. Colleagues, being elected as a member of this body imposes an ethical obligation for each of us to enhance and maintain the public confidence in this agency. As a board of directors, it is our collective duty to our constituents, stakeholders, and staff to conduct our business in an atmosphere of mutual respect, cooperation, civility, trust, and collegiality. These are the values we can all agree upon. As such, I encourage each of us to review the operating guidelines adopted by this board and to act in accordance with those principles, which are available on the Board of Directors page on the RTD website. Thank you. Ms. McManus, if we could do the roll call, please.
Thank you. Director Bouquet.
Present.
Director Broom.
Present.
Director Busick.
Here.
Director Catlin.
Here.
Director Cook.
Here.
Director Davidson.
Here.
Director Deschelle.
Here.
Director Geisinger.
Here.
Director Lewis,
Present.
Director Rosenthal,
Present.
Director Sloan,
Here.
Director Tisdale,
You're muted.
Present.
Director Whitmore,
Present.
Director Williams,
Good evening, I am here.
Chair Rivera Malpietti.
Present. Thank you.
15 present and accounted for. Thank you.
Thank you. At RTD, safety is our core value, and I'd like to begin this meeting with a short safety briefing. We must all continue to follow established health guidelines to keep ourselves safe and our loved ones safe. Continue to practice physical distancing. 6 feet is the minimum. Wear a mask at all times in public spaces, even if you've been partially or fully vaccinated. Get tested if you're experiencing symptoms or if you have been in contact with someone with the virus. Public health officials are encouraging individuals eligible to receive the vaccine to do so, regardless of the manufacturer of the vaccine available to you. All 3 currently available vaccines have proven to dramatically reduce the most severe risks of the virus. We're now at our public participation portion for the month of March. And since the regularly scheduled board meeting for the month will not be held, if you would wish to speak and have not already done so, please either raise your virtual hand or press star 9 on your phone. Staff will unmute you when it's your turn to speak. If you are dialed in, press star 6 to toggle your mute settings. As is our custom, we allow any of our elected officials present to speak first. Please bear in mind that by participating in this process, you are being recorded. So if you do not wish to be recorded, then your comments will have to be submitted in writing, and you will not have the opportunity to speak this evening. If any speaker has documentation or reference materials for the board, please email those materials to the board office at the following email address: board.office@rtd-denver.com. I will say that again: board.office@rtd-denver.com. During this time, the board will not offer comments or responses, and directors or staff may contact speakers following their comments if they raise matters that lend themselves to follow-up. Speakers should begin their remarks by stating their name, and each speaker will have 3 minutes to speak. And speakers, please refrain from profane or obscene speech. Direct your comments to the board as a whole and refrain from personal attacks. Now let me check and see. Mr. McKay, you can help me. I am not seeing anyone with a hand raised. Are you?
I see one hand from someone with a name, I guess, of Bicycle Colorado / Denver Streets. And that person is unmuted if you would like to go ahead and speak.
Please, can you state your name?
Sure. Good evening. My name is Molly McKinley. I serve as the vice chair of the Denver Streets Partnership, a coalition of community organizations advocating for people-friendly streets in Denver. And I'm here to express our support for the provisions in House Bill 1186. The Denver Streets Partnership is particularly excited to see the elimination of the fare box recovery ratio, as that will give RTD, the flexibility to lower fares and even offer free service to increase ridership. Right now, as you know, RTD has some of the highest fares in the country, and having the ability to readjust the fare structure would go a long way in serving low-income residents who rely on RTD's service the most. Additionally, we strongly support the recommendations, which will make it easier for RTD to encourage more equitable transit-oriented development and charge for parking. Land use and transportation are so inextricably linked, and this provision is a critical step towards ensuring our land use decisions support the kind of ridership we'd like to see for RTD. We would, however, like to express some concern about allowing RTD to contract over 58% of service to private businesses, nonprofit organizations, and local governments. We're really glad to see nonprofits and local governments included here, but we are concerned about a situation where RTD could become too heavily dependent on ride-hailing companies like Uber and Lyft. So if this change is made, we just caution RTD against relying too heavily on these companies, as a reliance would take away from high-capacity transit services that could serve far more people. But we do overall support the provisions in House Bill 1186. Thank you so much for holding the space for public participation this evening.
Thank you. Mr. McKay, I see no one else. Do you?
I concur.
Okay. With that, there are no participants in the queue. I will close the public participation period at this time. This evening, we had 2 recommended actions on our agenda. The first one was the RTD Board's position on House Bill District 21, House Bill 21-1186, reflecting of the Accountability Committee's legislative recommendations. We are pulling that this evening, and I would like to ask our general manager if she'd like to make some remarks.
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Chair, and to all those that are virtually assembled. I'm Deborah Johnson, General Manager and CEO. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak pertaining to the aforementioned item. Recognizing that this is a critical bill and we were bringing it forward to have the Board of Directors take a position on it. I, along with a member of my team, Michael Ford, Chief Operations Officer, we are working in tandem with the Amalgamated Transit Union to work on some nomenclature as it relates to one of the provisions set forward, which is the contracting aspect. Recognizing that it's in both of our best interests. This shouldn't be alarming. We're just working out the language that will work in the best interest for RTD as well as the union in reference to our service delivery options. So with that as a backdrop, it's our intention to work in tandem to modify said language. We will share that with the drafters and bring back to this board the bill once it is amended for your discussion on said item, which we anticipate to be in and around March 23rd. Thank you.
Thank you. General Counsel, do we need a motion to postpone?
Yes, Madam Chair, I think that would be good for the record.
Okay.
So moved.
I would.
So
I'm
moved.
sorry, who said so? Okay, Director Williams.
Second.
Director Reisinger. Is there any objection to postponing this motion?
I don't have an objection, but it's my understanding that we probably should put a specific date and how long we're going to postpone that for, and not just
Indefinitely.
get it happen. Yeah.
I think our general manager said March 23, correct?
Madam Chair, if I may, I did, but I would just say it's contingent upon when we can get the bill back and have it modified. So recognizing that the bill is supposed to be read March 30th, I'm assuming it would be prior to March 30th, but.
General Counsel, what would be your suggestion on how we word that motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I think why don't we say that the motion is to postpone this matter until, I think let's just pick a date certain. So no later than perhaps April 15th or April, let's see.
Well, if it's read on March 30th, it seems to me it should be like March 29th.
I think that makes sense. I just want to give the board some flexibility in the event that things change. You know, we can't always predict the timing on things with the legislature. So if the board's comfortable, you might, the last Friday in April is the 30th. It might make sense to just postpone until the end of April, to no later than the end of April.
All right.
so April 30th.
Got it. So we have a movement in a second to postpone.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Director Tisdale here. I had my hand raised. I just wanted to be able to ask a question before voting on the motion. And the question is, and I assume it goes without saying, but I'd like it to be on the record, that of course, General Manager and COO are conferring with Bradbury McKenna in the course of reviewing these changes. Thank you. That's my question, Madam Chair.
General Manager.
So as it relates to what's happening, we will be apprising our lobbyists, but I'm working directly with the union as it's not a policy matter. We're dealing with nomenclature. And so quite naturally, it's my intent to apprise the drafters, the sponsors of the bill as well. So that's my qualifier in reference to what our path forward is, recognizing that of course we would apprise our lobbyists, but it's something that staff is working on directly with the union. Thank you.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Director Tisdale?
Yes, Madam Chair, it does. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so the motion would move forward to postpone to no later than April 30th. The movement was Director Williams, the second First Vice Chair Geisinger. Is there any opposition? Hearing none, it passes unanimously. Thank you. Our next recommended action is the amendment to the RTD Code of Ethics on the Board of Directors financial disclosures. So what I'd like to do is ask our General Counsel if she could just do an update.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So some background on this amendment or the proposed amendment to the Code of Ethics. As it states in your board packet, the RTD Board of Directors adopted a Code of Ethics in February of 2018, and that's applicable to all RTD employees. The code generally prohibits RTD from entering into contracts with RTD employees or with a person or entity in which the employee has an interest. And this is consistent with the state statutory standards of conduct governing government employees and government officials and employees. Your board packet, page 21, lists some of the examples of when an employee is considered to have such an interest. For example, if it's a transaction involving an employee's immediate family member. The limited exceptions to this general prohibition are listed in the code on your board packet, page 22 of your packet. So for example, where an interest might be so remote, for example, if there's an unpaid volunteer of a nonprofit association, that's one example of an exception we have. The code includes an annual disclosure requirement for RTD directors and employees who are responsible for procurements or those that are engaged in the award or administration of contracts. This disclosure form is submitted annually to the General Counsel for review and is maintained as a confidential record in each individual employee's personnel file. So these disclosures are then used to create a list of persons or entities with whom RTD may be restricted from doing business. All proposed transactions are then compared against the list to see if there are any relationships that could potentially cause a conflict of interest, in which case the General Counsel and the Senior Manager of Materials Management confer and consult. The Executive Committee had some conversations and is recommending that the code be amended. The language for the proposed amendment to the code is on board packet page 23. The amendment provides that the annual disclosure forms for each elected or appointed RTD director be treated and designated as a public record open for inspection by any person, for example, in response to an open records request. This will authorize RTD to automatically disclose and release that information without requesting a director's individual prior consent. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'll move approval. I'd move approval that we adopt an amendment to the RTD Code of Ethics to provide that the annual disclosure form for each elected or appointed RTD director shall be a public record and shall be open for inspection by any person.
Busick, second.
I have a first and a second by Secretary Busick. Any comments or questions, ladies and gentlemen? Director Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my question is I believe General Counsel Snyder said that in order to obtain the disclosure, that there has to be a CORA request, or what would be the mechanism to do that? Or perhaps she spoke so quickly that I thought I heard her say that, or that's one of the options in order to obtain it. Or would it be through Secretary of State? They would have it would be on the tracer system, or where would that be located? Thank you.
General Counsel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, Director Rosenthal. So to be clear, these annual disclosure requirements are part of RTD's Code of Ethics, and they're completely separate from, for example, the financial disclosures or the information that actually is provided as part of the Fair Campaign Practices Act. So that information related to gifts of elected officials, for example, that is filed by each individual director and filed with the Secretary of State. RTD doesn't maintain any of those records. So if a person wanted to see those filings, they're actually available to the public online at the Secretary of State's website. For our disclosures, the normal process would be, yes, any member of the public could submit a request for that information. But that's not the only option that you could consider. If you wanted to make them more generally available, that would be an option as well.
If I could follow up, Madam Chair, just real quick. So
please.
Basically, there would just be like an email to you, Ms. Snyder, or a phone call, or a form that they fill out. We would like to obtain this, but it wouldn't have to be a CORA request. Is that right?
No, so we do ask that the public submit through our online portal. It's our QA platform, so they just submit requests, and then we will produce records within those the 3-day CORA requirements. I guess I was suggesting if there was some other alternative the board wanted to look at, for example, just posting this information on the website. No one has suggested that, but I just that could be an alternative if that's something that the board wanted to do.
Thank you.
All right. Director Catlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The form that's included in the packet is just that half-page form that discloses that you have no conflict of interest. It doesn't necessarily open the door for much more in-depth investigation of personal financial records, does it?
That's correct. Pardon me.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Correct. So RTD's form only requires right now for each director to disclose whether they have an interest and to provide information about what that interest is. It's not a financial disclosure form, for example, that some statewide elected officials are statutorily required to file. So, including additional information like interest in property and sources of income, that's not the level of detail in RTD's form.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make sure that it was clear for the record.
Thank you. Director Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two questions for General Counsel. What would it take from the board, or maybe from the agency, I'm not sure, to bring us closer as elected officials to what other elected officials might disclose?
So, Madam Chair, if I may.
Please.
So, Director Lewis, I think you're probably talking about there's a specific state statute that does apply to covered state officers, and it lists very specific information that those statewide officers are supposed to disclose. It wouldn't require a statutory change if the board decided that they wanted to disclose and make it a part of the Code of Ethics and your policy and procedures to do that and to disclose more information than required by state law. Could certainly do that.
Thank you so much. And the second question I have for you is probably a procedural one. What would it take, what would be necessary for us as a board to be able to offer what we do disclose currently via like our web page, as opposed to having someone submit a CORA request?
I don't understand the question. Could you say it again?
Did you understand the question,
no.
General Managers or Counsel?
Madam Chair, if I may.
Please.
So I think the question, Director Lewis, as I heard you to ask it, is something similar to what was being asked earlier by Director Rosenthal, which is, are there other options to make this information available more affirmatively by the board rather than having folks have to submit a court request? Is that?
Yeah, essentially, what more specifically, what would be the process to do so? So if we were just to agree as a board, which I'm not saying we do, that we'd like to have those disclosures put on our website for folks to be able to access at any point and not have to submit a court request, what would that process be?
I think you could have the conversation in this forum and decide that that's something that you all wanted to do.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Is that it? Are there all your questions, Director Lewis?
Those are all my questions, unless we want to have a conversation about just proactively posting those things. Otherwise, I'm done.
I don't see anybody else's hand up. Any discussion on that item of making it more attainable through mechanisms like our website? Any comment from any board director?
For the record, I would be in favor of it. Sorry, Madam Chair.
Director Williams?
I think without a lot of work, could put a link after each one of our descriptions on the board page that says, click here and see this document. I don't think that would be a lot of work, just as a suggestion.
Director Bouquet.
Sorry, I spoke out of turn. That was my bad. I would be in favor of it, Madam Chair. Sorry, I'm learning all the Roberts rules. But I think that Director Williams' suggestion of having that as on our website, having it, hey, if you want to collect more information or learn more from this director, I think that would be probably one of the easiest suggestions. Very obtainable, and I think that would be beneficial.
Okay, thank you. Director Catlin.
I believe Director Deschelle was before me.
Okay, I thought I saw you first, but go ahead, Director Deschelle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to echo my support for listing these publicly, but I would be remiss if we did not ask General Manager and CEO Johnson or anyone whom she designates what the expected staff time and cost would be to this, just to make sure that we are respecting our staff's time. While disclosure is incredibly important and something I support, I just want to make sure we're taking our entire agency into account in doing this.
General Manager.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, Director Deschelle. I could not quantify the time in which it would take staff at this juncture. That would be something I'd have to follow up on. So if that's something in which you're interested in knowing, we would be more than happy to assess what that is and apprise the board accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Catlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm in support of doing what Director Williams suggested. I'm just wondering if procedurally we have a motion in front of us. We're doing discussion. Would this particular action require an amendment to that motion? And I guess that would be subject for General Counsel Snyder.
Yes, and Madam Chair, if I may, I think when it comes down to sort of the administrative aspects of managing, this amendment, I think those are conversations that you can have either here or take it up at an executive committee. I don't think you need to amend this formal motion. The substantive motion is to amend the Code of Ethics. I don't think you need to put the level of detail that we're talking about in the actual code itself.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellent. I appreciate that.
Director Lewis.
I was just going to thank Director Williams for her suggestion and say that I support it, but I really appreciate Director Deschelle's question to staff about staff time and cost.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from board members? Okay, I am seeing none. So procedurally, what we need to do is vote on the amendment put forward by Second Vice Chair Cook and seconded it by Director Geisinger, I believe.
Busick. It's Busick.
Oh, I'm sorry. Secretary Busick, so very sorry. Okay. Is there any opposition to the amendment? Okay, hearing none, it passes unanimously. Now, as a point of procedure, and in General Counsel, you can help me, since this is the forum that you say that the board can have a discussion of deciding whether or not to put this as a link to our website. I guess there's two things I'd like to get answers from. Should we wait until we can get an amount of time and what it would cost for the staff to be able to make those changes to our website before we move that piece forward? Or how would you suggest we do this, General Manager?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. So I support what General Counsel Snyder has said in reference to the motion you have before you. We can ascertain staff time and apprise accordingly as we move forward, recognizing that this is information that will be disclosed. So we know we're going to proceed in that direction as it relates to staff time or the mechanism in which we need to discern. We can apprise accordingly, but I don't believe that'll be a hindrance in ensuring that this comes to fruition. Thank you.
I guess my second question would be to the board, if you are in favor of doing this on our website and just having a link that they can click and have access to our financial disclosure. Could I just have a show of hands, maybe?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Director Whitmore.
Yeah, I think motion should stand and we should move on. This is step one in moving to a better disclosure as delineated by 4 or 5 of my colleagues. I have no problem with that, but I don't think this was on the agenda as a discussion item. And to Director DeShell's point, let's find out what more information we need from staff in regarding the cost and give us a little more time to look at other avenues as well to make this disclosure. There may be others, so I think we should move on.
Duly noted. Okay, we are done with.
Real quick too, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, but I think also important is to keep in mind, if we do put it on the website and we have an expansive, let's just say disclosure form, you know, how much personal information is on there. And, you know, I'd like to really know kind of what the form looks like as well, as to, you know, once we know more what the form looks like, you know, what information is on there, you know, we just need more flexibility as to where it's going to be put at this point.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I would recommend along those lines, if we could, I'm sorry, I don't have a hand, that we look at what local governments do, which is somewhere in between. I think that might be more appropriate in some ways for where we are. So just would add that as a suggestion too for further research.
All right, thank you so very much, everybody. I'm going to move on to other matters, and let me start by saying that there are 2 items I would like to address in other matters, and then I will yield the floor to others. Number 1, first, we have received questions regarding the agency's overall policy towards enforcing the wearing of face coverings pursuant to state and federal requirements. And I would just like to ask our General Manager and CEO, Deborah Johnson, to respond to those concerns.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to address. Recognizing we are in the midst of the pandemic, and I do recognize as well that President Biden instituted a federal mask mandate, and preceding that, we here in Colorado and specifically within our service area had already had safety protocols in place to which we have asked our customers to adhere. That still is what we're doing going forward. Recognizing that what we're doing when somebody is not complying, we are enforcing it from the vantage point of educating and informing those members of the public about the need to wear a face covering. More specifically, we as an agency have been disseminating face coverings while we have supplies. Additionally, we have worked with our communications team and have notifications out that state that we are adhering to the federal mandate as we go forward. I do recall at a meeting we had in January whereby we had conversations that ensued about this as well, recognizing we want to ensure that our riding public as well as our frontline employees are being protected. As we all know, this is a precarious position relative to ensuring that people are being compliant. So as I stated, we are operating from the vantage point from a compliance standpoint about educating and informing the vast public about the need to adhere to the federal mandate as well as the other public health orders that are prevalent within our immediate service area. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And then the second is, I'd like to ask the board members to take out your pencils because I'm going to give you a lot of information. We are going to be having a number of trainings, workshops, and other meetings that are either currently scheduled or they're anticipated in the coming weeks and the months. I know how busy everybody is, so I just wanted to say them to you so that you could hear them. The first is study sessions. We have 2 study sessions coming up. The first one is scheduled for 5:30 for the first 2 Tuesdays in April. So just know that I think it's the 6th and the 9th, I can't remember. If you look at the first 2 Tuesdays in April, we're going to have a study session at 5:30. On April 6th, the staff are going to present plans for the agency's road to recovery. And on April 13th, we will continue to discuss the Northwest Rail. So those will be 2 really important study sessions. Additionally, we will be having JEDI training, and we are anticipating 1 session on average every quarter for both this year and next year. Staff is also working with directors to put on an electrification workshop, and representatives from the energy and electrification agencies will be invited to speak, and this will take place later in the year. Each director will need to participate in a workday training. That's our new system for our HR department. And it will allow you to complete the required annual cybersecurity training on your own. So that's the next training, is cybersecurity. Staff is targeting Tuesday, March 30th for the 2 training sessions. One will be at 4 p.m. and one will be at 5:30 p.m. The first finance workshop was held this afternoon, and there are 4 more scheduled out through the year. The board and the senior leadership team are going to need to engage in strategic planning sessions between now and the end of summer. And the currently formed ad hoc committees will soon begin their work, and there will always be the possibilities that these new committees will need to be added. The accountability committee and its subcommittees will continue to meet into the spring, and though the release of the federal census data has been delayed, at some point in the coming months, the board will need to address all of its existence. In addition to all those meetings, our regularly scheduled board and committee meetings and their own day jobs, the directors also have time obligations to existing external committees and appointments, such as the DRCOG Regional Transportation Committee and the Regional Parkway Authority boards. Those are just 2 of many that we sit on. Suffice to say, there's a lot coming our way, and I would request that you please be conscientious of the fact that our board's current and upcoming time commitments, not to mention the demands on our staff. I'm really worried about their workload because we are packing so much in such a short period of time. So when you're thinking of requesting additional events to our already full calendar, if you just think about that, I would really, really appreciate it. With that, is there any other matters to discuss? Director Lewis.
I would actually like to discuss both of the things that you brought up in other matters. The first being the universal mask wearing and the enforcement. And then I'd like to make some comments about the study session, particularly the finance committee that we just recently had. Regarding the universal mask wearing, and maybe this is a conversation that's better for a conversation to be had with my colleagues and less about with the staff, because I've had numerous conversations with General Manager Johnson about enforcement regarding mask. And I've received a number of inquiries from constituents within my district, but also constituents from other districts for which I do not represent. And there has just been some concern about how we might enforce, what enforcement might look like. And some folks have felt, at least the conversations that I've had, that we aren't doing enough to enforce. While I understand folks are on edge, I understand we don't want to give our operators another task for them to have to be responsible for. I do think as an agency, or maybe as a board, that we should think about what talking points or what positions that we have when folks are reaching out to us regarding universal mask wearing, and specifically the enforcement of such, because I don't know if we've collectively decided what it is that we are to say in terms of a response to our constituents who are concerned when they board one of our services, that other patrons or customers may not have masks on their faces. And the instruction that our operators, our frontline staff have received is, to ask the customer to put their mask on, and if they do not, to contact, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I totally forgot. They're supposed to contact dispatch. For some folks, that's sufficient. And then for other folks who utilize our services, namely the folks who've reached out to me, it's insufficient. And so I personally, as a board member, have had to grapple with what message I am providing to constituents as an individual director, but I've also wondered as a board, what's our message? Where do we stand? Are we most interested in ensuring that our frontline staff are supported and taken care of? Or are we most interested in ensuring that all patrons or all customers wear masks? And so I'd love for us to have a discussion, because it continues to come up. And I had hoped that we could have this discussion in executive session and during the executive committee meeting. And unfortunately that was canceled. So here we are, and you all are being presented with this on the spot, but it's something that comes up, and I would love to hear what you all are maybe discussing with your constituents and how we might be able to move this conversation forward, because I don't know if I've landed on anything that I would feel comfortable saying in terms of representation for the agency.
Thank you. Thank you. Director Burrow.
Bob, we are not hearing you. You must be muted. If you press *6 on your keyboard, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm not seeing him on here now. All right. Well, let me go to if anyone else have any other comments. Director Deschelle. You're muted, sir.
There we go. I would say at this point, I'm probably using the system 3 to 4 days a week to and from downtown from the district. And in my experience, simply asking affirmatively people who are not wearing their mask to wear their mask has been successful. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a official board position, but just wanted to share in my own experience, there are certainly people who get on the bus, they put their mask on, they sit down, they take their mask off, or it slips below. But most people, if they are kindly asked to wear their mask over their nose, with one exception in my experience, have put that on. So it could be really embracing a culture of health and asking everyone to look out for one another and to support one another and to support people when you see them standing up for what's right and you see them standing up for health. And really, this is a community issue in the same way that if someone in the office isn't wearing their mask, you work together to address that as a community and make sure they're wearing it.
Thank you. Director Rosenthal, did I see your hand?
I didn't put it up, but I do have a thought. You know, I appreciate what Director Deschelle just said, that all it takes is just a little ask. And I guess could we also have some of our ambassadors occasionally get on? And obviously we have hundreds of buses, so you can't have ambassadors get on every single bus. And I know it's not been the practice up to now to have ambassadors on our buses. But if we could, just as a pilot project, maybe on some of the busiest routes, to have ambassadors just get on and have some extra masks and have some hand sanitizer and say, hey, does anybody need a mask? And anybody need a hand sanitizer? So just sort of, that might be just something where we could pilot that on a smaller basis and just see, would that help? And that's also something we could also tell constituents, like, hey, let's take an extra step to just see how that works, and would that help alleviate the matter?
Yes, thank you. Director Broom, did you want to speak, sir?
Yes, thank you.
You have the floor.
I just had a question about, I made a request for a briefing on how well RTD is prepared to deal with power grid going down like it did in Texas a few weeks ago. Could Ms. Johnson speak to that? Thank you.
Yes, so thank you very much, Director Broom. It's our intent to bring that back during the Capital Programs and Fast Tracks Committee on April 6th. Thank you very kindly.
Thank you. That's all I had. Thank you.
Director Lewis, do I see your hand up again?
If there are other folks in line, I would love to hear from other directors.
Any other directors? I'm not seeing any. Oh, Director Davidson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director Lewis, for the question. It's a good one, and I do hear from constituents and have also heard from operators in the district. I'm curious to Ms. Johnson, the CEO and General Manager Johnson. Do we, when I do hear from constituents, I would say it's anecdotal, and in my own experience, I mean, some lines, some routes seem okay in terms of compliance, and then some there seem to be more anecdotal evidence. But do we have a good understanding of order of magnitude in terms of across the entire district, lack of compliance, how many incidents? Do we have some place that we're collecting this information? Do we have a sense of the problem?
Thank you very much, Director Davidson. That is a very good question. I remember us touching upon that previously in a board discussion. So no, we don't have an understanding of the order of magnitude. Relative to us tracking any incidents that are happening on the system, they are generally coded in such a way. So if you had, a altercation, it wouldn't necessarily say it germinated from that of non-mask wearing or what have you. So no, we don't have any mechanisms in place whereby we're tracking that. If I am mistaken, I would ask a member of my leadership team to clarify that for me if I've misspoken. Mr. Ford?
Yes, this is Michael Ford, COO. We generally get information through our dispatch. Our operators will call in, and they should be tracking at least the incident or pushing a button to advise them, or if security is called to the scene. So I believe that information is being tracked. I will definitely double back on that, but that information should be in our system, and we'll continue to provide any other information that's necessary. But I believe that is being tracked as we speak.
So
Thank you very much.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yes.
I was just going to say, Mr. Ford, that's coming in through dispatch, but I was talking about capturing in our system like a CRM or something of that magnitude.
I will get back to you on that. There may be a system that is being put into, but I will need to check with some of my staff just to verify that.
All right, thank you. And excuse me, Director Davidson.
No, thank you. Excuse me for, yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. And if there is some follow-up information, that would really help in terms of understanding, where and what the problem is, which may help with Director Lewis's point of designing particular solutions or positions, because my suspicion from the anecdotal is that it is different in different areas, but I would love to have a better sense of that. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Director Dishell, did you have another question? You're muted.
If I talk agenda in this meeting, I'm going to get it right. I noticed that on the bus now, or at least sometime during the pandemic, we started adding, please use rear door boarding unless the ramp is needed or something like that. What is the cost and how easy is it to add as we go by stops, a similar item after someone gets on where it reads out, as required by federal law, please wear your mask or something over your nose or something to that effect? Is that an easy, inexpensive option? And do those work, generally speaking?
So thank you very
sort of
much.
robo announcement.
Thank you very much, Director Dishell. We'd have to program the automatic enunciators. And so basically they'd have to be recorded and pushed out through software to all of the buses. So that would take some time to do. Recognizing that there are certain requirements which have to be broadcast over the enunciator, i.e., transfer stops in compliance with the ADA, as well as safety messages. So it's based upon the rotation as we go forward, recognizing how many messages we already have basically captured in the system. So we'd have to delve into that to discern how frequently that would be played, because it may not be automatic, contingent upon what I just shared relative to the other requirements on that limited scope that we have to push out.
Got it. That makes sense. I just wanted to throw it out as an option. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Director Lewis, you were next.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director Dishell and Davison, for your comments. I do appreciate it. I would say anecdotally, and of course I don't have this data, but at least what I've heard from operators and from our patrons is the 15, the 51, and the 31 as routes that we might want to maybe take a closer look, or to see if what the data might be telling us. I just receive it often enough that I feel as though, with the data, to Director Davison's point, we might be able to come up with, how we might move forward in a way that really values and centers our frontline staff and our operators, but also our customers as well. And I imagine there's a way to do both. And right now, I don't know if I have a good answer for that, but I think a discussion as colleagues, as board members is worthy, because it has come up quite a bit. And I've also looked at other agencies, and some agencies are no mask, no ride, and I'm not in any way suggesting that, but I think it just might be worth our evaluation in comparison of other agencies. If we see the data and we see that this is happening more often, this is happening often, or if we are noticing themes that it be incumbent upon us to do something about it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Second Vice Chair Cook.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with some of the comments, many of them, and would second the idea of getting a better gauge on this. My experience, again, this is anecdotal, but it seems to be worsening considerably recently. Maybe that's because we're relaxing our code level and so forth throughout the state, but this isn't the time to do it. And our frontline employees haven't yet received or gotten into the phase that's prioritized. So I think it's still pretty important. And the second thing is that if there is a way to do an ambassador program, as Paul Rosenthal suggested, I think that's a good idea as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Assistant General Manager Tanilis.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. I just wanted to piggyback onto some of the information shared about, are we capturing information by route, where we see this might be a problem, through the customer care division and our new Salesforce customer relationship management that launched the first phase. We may be able to pull what we're hearing from our customers and categorize that. At the April 6th Communications and Government Relations Committee meeting, we actually are going to start briefing the board on some of the common themes that we're hearing from our customers just across the board, not just about mask wearing or what have you, but we can try to pull what we have and see if we're seeing some recurring problems on certain routes or what have you, and include that in that report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm not seeing anyone else's hand up. Is there anyone else? Oh, First Vice Chair Geisinger.
Thank you. Just briefly, you know, if Director Cook's comment is right, that it's getting worse, that is a concern. And it may well be, because I do see people kind of opening up and some of the states are going that way. So I like the idea of trying to capture some information and see what we can do to head that off. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, anyone else? Okay, seeing none.
Director Lewis has her hand up still.
Director Lewis.
Thank you, Director Williams. I appreciate that. I had a second comment about the second other matters that you had proposed regarding the study sessions in the calendar. It's just a general opportunity for us to consider. I know we had the finance workshop or study session this afternoon that started at 2:30, and many of us work full time, and some of us don't have the flexibility that maybe other directors have to be able to attend some of these things that happen at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 2:30, or even 11 o'clock in the afternoon. And so I would ask that the board just consider on a general basis the opportunity for maybe us to have some more of those meetings beginning at 5:30 in the evening. Really just an opportunity. I mean, I think what I've heard from board members is that we truly value diverse perspectives, diverse experiences, diversity on our board. And I think one of the hindrances to getting that diversity is the time in which we might have our meetings. And so just a consideration for the board that we might think about having something at 5:30 as opposed to 2:30 in the afternoon. While I do appreciate that we can go back and watch these videos, there's nothing like getting a presentation and being able to answer those questions in real time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Director Williams.
I was just going to say that all Zoom meetings are recordable. And if I understand that I have a full-time job myself. And if I can't make a meeting, then it's on me to go and watch it when I can look at it. So, but I understand Director Lewis's point that it's not the same when you can't participate live.
Thank you. Any other matters to come before the board? Okay, I'm going to call it 6:27 p.m. We are adjourned. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second. All in, or anybody opposed?
Can we take a 5-minute break before we go to the next meeting?
It is 6:27, and I'm going to say if we could take, like come back at 6:35, and that will be the next meeting, which is operations and customer service. Thank you, everybody.
I get the presentation.
I think everything. So they just didn't want to do it.
This is the answer I get back.
Let's see if I can do it.
Okay, heads up, everybody. We'll be starting in just a moment. Okay, I'm starting to see some faces. Okay, let's do this. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Operations and Customer Service Committee will now come to order. We're convened as of 6:36 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. I would respectfully ask that everyone attending this meeting, please mute yourself unless you are recognized to speak. I do not believe we need to do a roll call. We've done that already this evening. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Please note that under current circumstances, the official meetings of the RTD Board of Directors are being held remotely in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare. For the immediate future, the meetings of the Board of Directors will be held via Zoom. These meetings are audio and video recorded. The meeting recordings, along with the unofficial minutes of the meeting, will be posted as soon as possible. Oh, no more practicable? Possible. On the board's website. You can visit rtd-denver.com and scroll to the bottom of the page for the link to the Board of Directors page to find that information. As always, directors and members of staff, for the sake of the record, if you would like to be acknowledged during tonight's proceedings, please raise your virtual yellow hand and wait for me to call you before proceeding to speak. Directors and staff participating by phone can also raise their hands to indicate they would like to speak by pressing *9. To mute and unmute yourself, you can press *6. Please note that we will not be taking public commentary during this committee meeting. Members of the public who are interested in speaking were given the opportunity to do so earlier tonight and are encouraged to do so during the normal monthly board meeting. For future meeting dates, you can go to the board's meeting portal located at rtd.iqm2.com. Interestingly, we have no recommended actions this evening as part of this committee, so we are going to move to discussion items unless anybody has anything else that they want to bring up at this point. Seeing no hands, I'm going to make a change to the published order of the discussion items and ask the Accessory Paratransit Advisory Committee report to take place first. Mr. Buter, do you want to introduce Brenda?
This is Michael Ford, Chief
Ford?
Operating Officer. Yes, just wanted to give some context regarding the Accessory Paratransit Advisory Committee. In the 1990s, the Regional Transportation District established the ADA Paratransit Advisory Committee to promote its effective, efficient, and customer responsive paratransit services known as the Accessory. APAC members have been engaged in dialogue with the RTD staff on issues, trends, needs, policies, and resources pertaining to accessory services throughout the district and offer a unique perspective with the goal of continuously improving those services. Paratransit is a demand responsive transit service required by the Americans with Disabilities Act. APAC provides input to RTD that is intended to improve the quality of accessibility of accessory services, advance the need of the disabled customers who rely on accessory services, strengthen communications between RTD and the organizations that advocate for the needs of accessory customers, promote collaboration, transparency, and information sharing, ensure meaningful and diverse community input, participation, and involvement in RTD's paratransit related services. So for tonight, we're obviously wanting to have a presentation by Brenda Carney as a member of the APAC committee, and she's going to talk about the January 12th, 2021 APAC meeting, and we look to continue to bring members from APAC to provide some presentations as we continue down this road. So with that, I'd like to introduce Brenda Carney, APAC member for the January 12th, 2021 report, which is also contained in your packet. So with that, Brenda, thank you. Brenda, can you hear us?
I think she's working on getting unmuted.
Okay.
And I apologize, Mr. Ford. Mr. Buter's face was right next to mine. I didn't see you there waiting to speak.
No worries.
Brenda, I see you now. If you can unmute, then you can give us your report. There you go.
Here we go. Okay, I'm gonna have to, I'm just gonna put them here, and I apologize. I don't know what you guys can see. I'm visually impaired and I don't do these things well. So we'll start anyway. So thank you for allowing me to speak. We had several things under consideration for our meeting, and one of the biggest things had to do with a project which was sort of a started by the RTD IT department. One of his major clients is Accessory, and we have been struggling for years to get an accessible application, something that all people with disabilities can use to schedule our trips individually rather than having to call into the call center. It saves time for us, time for them, whatever. So we had been struggling with this, and Brandon is our hero because he said, well, I think we can take it on internally, and by golly, he did. So we tested, I think it was in September, and the original application was released in October, and it was great, but there are always things in applications. So they worked on the little things and put them out as fast as they could, but they had a larger set of requests that people had as they used it. And so they had another request for APAC to test in at our January 12 meeting, and they put out things like ability to implement drop up and hang on, I can't read. They gave us the ability to put in individual addresses. Let's see, they have the fare that we have to pay listed now. They now show the driver number on the ETA. The general contact number for the phone number is on the bottom of the screens. And they moved the ability to book trips from 2 to 5 days to 1 to 5 days. So it was a pretty big release. So we tested after that, and they implemented that release. And like I said, Brandon is our hero. They're amazing in IT, and the Accessory staff has been amazing around this. So I just want to give kudos to both sides. Yay. So our next thing that we discussed, if I can ever figure out my notes here, is that RTD was releasing an RFP for the new I can talk, eligibility and travel training vendor. And so we discussed when that was going to be, etc. Let's see. Hang on, sorry. So RTD has discussed with us the idea of a proposed pilot for a combination of accessory and fixed route for people who can't get to fixed route, but once they can get there, they can access it. So this would help with peak time travel, especially. And so that was, and that hasn't been started yet, but it's in the works as I understand it. So let's see. We were also informed that RTD was developing requirements for new software vendors. That's another yay. And in October, RTD began a 6-month pilot with Uber about actually taking customers from Accessory on trips. And the first phase was focused on 4 zip codes, so kind of a small area. And it was also focused on people who are ambulatory or who can fold wheelchairs into a sedan trunk. So that they discussed that pilot with us and explained it to us, and kind of let us know how it was going. So the second phase will be after that completes, it would be for a wheelchair accessible vehicle component, which, as I understand it, is run. The vehicles will be actually go through the Uber app, but they will be run via one of RTD's contractors. So that was interesting. So then we discussed what data or information or feedback we would like to receive for this year. And we had we wanted more discussion on the fixed route and accessory combination pilot, also on travel training. And once the vendor gets selected for that, they'll come to discuss that with us. We wanted information on what the status of the Colfax investment project and the 16th Street Mall development. And we also wanted information on the centralized 70 construction and impacts on transit that that would be in and around the areas of North Denver. So basically those were the kind of things that we discussed, and that's the end of my status.
Thank you, Brenda. Mr. Ford, have anything you want to add to that?
No, I really appreciate the report, and I thank her for, Brenda, thank you for your participation today.
Well, thank you very much for allowing me. It was lovely.
Appreciate you bringing us all that information, Brenda. That was great. Okay, I think we're going to move on to the next item in our discussions, which is stakeholder engagement service adjustments. And let's do hello, sorry.
It looks like Chair Garmo committee has her hand up.
Thank you for that, Chair.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you so much for that report. It was great. I just had one question. What is the timeline for the first phase to end and the second phase to start?
Brenda, can you unmute if you have the answer, and if not, is there a staff member who wants
to?
You are.
So the original pilot, the first phase, was 6 months, and so that exceeded where the boundary of our meeting. But maybe I can speak a little bit out of turn now. I think they're now on phase 2.
Okay.
It's the same zippies and everything, the same population. And, if anybody from RTD, if I got that wrong, please feel free to let us all know.
Chair, does that answer your question?
It does. The only other question, and this might be one for the staff, is what are the 4 zip codes that are being identified for this service?
Mr. Ford? Brenda?
Am I muted again?
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, let's see if I can get this right. They are, I think, 802.13 to 16. I know the last 4 digits, and I apologize. That was one thing I didn't write down, but they're in the Aurora kind of Centennial area, as I understand. So it's either 802.13 through 16 or 800.13 through 16.
Okay.
I apologize for that.
No, that's fine. Thank you so much. That's all my questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair. Director Lewis, I see your hand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had one question. It's a question maybe for the staff. First, I'd like to thank you, Brenda, this Director Lewis, for coming and giving us this update. Really appreciate it. The question that I have, yeah, absolutely. The question that I have for the staff is regarding the discussion, what data information and or feedback would APAC members like to get or give in the coming years? And I was just curious of how that information would flow back to APAC members, the requested information.
Mr. Ford?
Yes, I'll ask Larry or Paul to maybe comment on that, please.
This is Paul Hamilton, Senior Manager of Paratransit Services. If I understand Director Lewis's question, it's how would we assure that any input that the directors are giving flows back to the APAC committee members? Is that correct?
No, thank you. I'm so glad you asked that clarifying question, Mr. Hamilton. I was actually asking, it's the information that the APAC members, I believe, were requesting from RTD for their agenda for the year. And so a few things that I can pull out is the 16th Street construction, Colfax investment, the Central 70 construction. It looks like a request for information.
I understand. So yeah, at the bottom of the agenda,
Correct.
they were outlining some of the things that were discussion topics that they might like to take on over the course of the year. But one of the ways that they go about adding items to the agenda for each meeting is at the end of each meeting, they are all polled as to what items they would like to take on at the next specific meeting, whereas this was the first meeting of the year, and they were kind of trying to come up with a laundry list of things that they might like to take on or have us provide feedback to. But in most instances, anytime something comes up like this, and as you say, in the case of the Colfax investments, we would research whatever the specific question was and then come back with a report at the very next meeting.
I see. I see. So you're not necessarily going to give every single thing that's here. It's just an opportunity for some ideation. And then if they decide to move forward on whatever this request is, then that would be responded with data in a presentation.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. Thank you so much for that. And then I have a question for you, Brenda, if you're up for it, and you can answer this question now, or you can
Sure.
Take a moment and maybe come back to it. But I am curious as to what would be helpful for us as board members that we should know from the APEC members, or how when you all are meeting, is there anything important for us to know, or a way that you'd like to interface with us or be involved with us? I really appreciate you coming to give us this presentation, and I would hate for you to leave without anything to report back to APAC members as you've had an opportunity to converse with the board.
That's lovely. It's a very good question. I think that is not Director Williams going to become more closely involved with us? Do I remember correctly?
That is correct, Brenda. That was why I was announcing myself at the meeting today. And then I will help report back.
Yeah, and we can, to me, that's a great interface. That, one of you guys is actually directly taking that on and, maybe either meeting at the meetings or meeting with us, or, however you so choose. I was actually pretty impressed with that. So I think that's a good start.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Brenda. You have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lewis. Good to go. I don't see any other hands before I let Brenda take a break and somebody else take the floor, which I
thought I heard somebody.
Yeah, I don't see any hands. Any other questions? Okay, guess not. Thanks again, Brenda.
Thank you so much.
See you later.
You bet.
Okay, I think the next item that we have is the stakeholder engagement service adjustments, and I believe that Ms. Tonellis is going to speak to that. Pauletta?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. This is actually going to be a collaboration between myself and Chief Operations Officer Michael Ford and Senior Manager of Service Planning Jesse Carter. So I will start off the presentation and I will attempt to share my screen, hopefully successfully for all of you. Let's see if this works.
Pauletta, you're very soft to my ear. I don't know about anybody else.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me better now? Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try to get a little closer to the
There
mic.
it is.
Can you hear me okay?
That's better. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I am here to talk to you about the stakeholder engagement process that we did at the beginning of this service change process. As we reported to you previously, we are really implementing an enhanced approach to stakeholder engagement across the whole agency. And General Manager Johnson has talked about this, where she coming into the organization wants to listen more than she speaks. She's talked about wanting to go where the people are. We agree, and we have been out there in force in many stakeholder meetings. And so part of this enhanced approach to engagement was us doing the quiet zone education meetings that we recently did across all the commuter rail corridors. We did those last week at each of our commuter rail lines with the residents that live along those lines. And then also starting this stakeholder listening process as part of our service change process moving forward. So these listening sessions that we held, we did at various stakeholder meetings where we went to stakeholders in their meetings where they meet, but then we also held 5 geographic sector meetings, as you recall, and many of you did attend those meetings, where we invited stakeholders who we work with a lot as it relates to service in their communities to engage with us and tell us what their thoughts are as it relates to RTD service in their area. What are they hearing from their communities? What are they seeing in terms of people recovering back from the pandemic? And these were really fruitful discussions. What we did was hold 10 original meetings with people from the time frame of January 28th to February 22nd. And you see on the screen some of these that we held with the Boulder County Mobility for All group, the Denver Local Coordinating Council, and also our Citizens Advisory Committee and the Regional Transit Mobility Organization and Association group. So these are all of our TMO, TMA partners across the region. And Dr. Cog hosts a quarterly meeting with those groups. And we went to that meeting where they all meet and use that as a listening session. And then we also did one with our partners at Denver Public Schools and listen to them and their feedback as they try to march back to in-person learning and what lies ahead for the next semester. The 5 geographic sector meetings that I mentioned, we did have quite a good participation across the board with the meetings that we held. We had about 155 attendees that gave us their thoughts, their opinions, and what ended up being helpful feedback for us before the drafting of the service change for June actually started. Some of what we heard in our stakeholder listening sessions, really we boiled these down to a number of themes. Things like people wanted to see equitable service return. And what that really means is let's try to serve the people who are most transit dependent, so the people who rely on transit most. Also, making sure that we're continuing to move essential workers to get to the places where they want and need to go. And then as students start to need to get back to their campuses, making sure that we're crafting our service adjustments to meet the students' needs. Also, how can we make sure that vaccine distribution sites are accessible to people who will be able to take RTD service. The in-school learning support as it relates to the largest school district, Denver Public Schools. I mentioned the meeting that we held with our partners there. And we use that as an opportunity to also talk to them about what lies ahead for even next fall semester. Suspended and canceled services. A really interesting piece of feedback was people wanting to know more of, well, what is the service that has been canceled by RTD through the various service adjustments, and what is just suspended? And so us trying to make it clear of suspended service that we think is more on the edge of possibly being brought back. Also, transparent communication about service and how we design that. And what that really means is how we determine the service that we will incrementally be bringing back into operation. Other themes that we heard were the more highly utilized routes. How can we continue to add frequency to those routes as needed, and as we see more and more riders go back to those more popular routes? Our flex ride service, our on-demand service, and educating people about that service. A lot of people are not aware of the great service that we have with FlexRide. Reliability on rail and bus. So because we have cut back on service, the reliability being even more important that we need to ensure for our bus and train routes. And then they really did appreciate that we are holding this process, the stakeholder engagement process. They would just like to make sure that we get those meetings on their calendars and let them know about that sooner. Obviously, us trying this out as a pilot, we jumped right in, and so there wasn't as much notice for those geographic sector meetings, but for the next round, we will get those on people's calendars sooner. And then we did get some feedback on more specific routes, people wanting to see additional service or what we could do on specific routes. This is just a graphic to depict what we're trying to achieve with our enhanced engagement process. Obviously, those stakeholder listening sessions start us off on our service change process. And then we, of course, bring that draft service plan back to the board, which is what we're doing tonight, after taking what we heard from our stakeholders into consideration as one data point and one set of information that our staff considers as they draft that service plan. And then from there, we will take these out to our public partners and our customers, the people who we move, and we'll ask them to weigh in on these service adjustments through our public meetings that we'll hold at the end of the month. Then we'll bring the final plan back to the board of directors, and then that final service change will be implemented, in this case, in June. And then we start over with the engagement process. This engagement process really is ongoing. We'll be having dialogue with our stakeholders as we have meetings with them even now. So it isn't going to be just, okay, folks, it's time for the stakeholder listening sessions. We will continue to listen, continue to engage, but then that specific listening session process will begin as we start that next service change process. We are going to be doing a debrief to look at what went really well, what things can we tweak through that listening session process and refine that. And then that, of course, is what we will march forward with. The upcoming service change public hearings will be at the end of the month. So we'll be doing 3 of these meetings virtually, and the times that we have set for these meetings are what we have found to be best suited for people to engage with us in a virtual setting. We will have these recorded and do these in English and Spanish. And of course, we'll be promoting these in great form in our various channels. I am going to now turn this section over to Michael Ford, our Chief Operations Officer. Michael.
Thank you, Pauletta. I want to talk a little bit about the financial and service impacts. As you are aware, we received $232 million in CARES Act funding in 2020, and we are positioned to receive another $203 million of CARISA funds. That money is intended to support transit operators, including keeping staff employed, recall, layoff represented employees, which we've been actively engaged in and brought a number of people back. Rescind furlough days and pay reductions for salary employees, and providing supplemental service for our busier routes, meaning that we'd be running extra sections to help augment the needs for those particular routes. With regard to COVID-19, which we're still in, we're carrying about 40% of our ridership, our pre-pandemic ridership, and we're putting about 60% of our service out there. There are limited abilities to increase service due to operator availability. We continue to work on that to make sure we have enough folks, and that's an ongoing issue, but we're working on that very diligently. And capacity limits due to social distancing requires supplemental services. I just want to reemphasize that. Next slide, please. So service changes during COVID-19. A lot of things to consider as we move forward. Overall system ridership, looking at the data, ridership on routes, lines, levels of support, and increased adjustments is another focus area that we consider. System maintenance to improve on-time performance. Managing tweaks and making improvements where we have noted issues or concerns. Performance reliability and contract compliance. We have a collective bargaining agreement that we have to adhere to. So that also is another consideration that we have to focus on. And then adjustments for transit system connectivity to make sure our service is totally integrated and continues that way. Many challenges though that exist, maintaining resources, the capacity to support social distancing, transforming unscheduled service hours that we've been putting out there into scheduled hours. So that's another focus and challenge, and expectation of return to service. How can we be poised and ready, nimble, to address a lot of ever-changing issues? A picture is worth 1,000 words, and if you can look at the pre-COVID operator with one bus, one operator carrying 25 people, and our reality today is we're going to need, and we have two operators, two buses carrying 25 people. So again, putting more resources out, operators and buses to carry what we were carrying in the pre-COVID time. So that puts a major strain on the system. Next slide. And then again, a lot of the things that we're doing with board adopted guidelines or guiding principles, if you will, to help us manage through this COVID period. These guidelines were adopted a while ago when we were starting up to just give staff guidance on how we can move forward. So, looking at service standards, service utilizations, effect on the integrity of the transit network to transit dependent people. These are things that we consider and try to adhere to. Alternative service availability to impacted customers. Obviously focused on Title VI and Civil Rights Act, respond to changes in communities. So being nimble, understanding what people are having to say, listening and trying to make adjustments where we can, and cost-effective distribution and the ability to enhance service when possible. So all these things are integral to how we try to manage the service and make it as productive and meeting the needs of our customers, constituents, and stakeholders. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jesse Carter to go into some more details around the June 2021 service proposal. And I'll turn it over to Jesse.
Okay, thanks, Michael. First question, can everyone hear me? Head nod, okay, all right, good.
Yes, we hear you fine, Jesse.
Great, thanks. It may sound like I'm shouting at you because I have this thing really close to my mouth, but at the same time, I just want to go over some of the more notable service changes that we have proposed. The first one, the Route 15 Colfax. East Colfax currently represents the largest of our bus routes in terms of retained ridership. It constitutes the 15 by itself is 34% of the calls that we get for buses over capacity are on the Route 15. So we're proposing to increase the service level on that route. So that speaks to some of what Michael spoke about earlier, and that is making sure that we're looking at utilization, ridership, and utilization of our services. And then moving to the Route 20, this proposal extends the East Terminal from the Anschutz Medical Campus to our East Metro Division. And this is one of those CBA compliance type of changes where we're trying to create a situation in which we have a respite area that is open for our operator. Moving on to the Route 28. The Route 28, we're proposing to extend that route from 30th and Downing Station to Central Park Station, providing better connectivity to the University of Colorado A line, and also to address some requests that we've heard from a senior center located just east of downtown. Also, the Route 40, this is one of two service reductions that we're proposing. This discontinues the extension between 40th and Colorado Station to 60th and Dahlia and Commerce City. And we're proposing that because it duplicates exactly the Route 49, which was introduced in September of last year. We are also proposing the Route 44 change its terminal at Ward Road Park and Ride to Wheat Ridge Ward Road Station. This is a station that is just across the roadway, not too far. It also involves the Route 38, which would do the same thing. This would, of course, provide better connectivity between our bus system and our rail system. The Route 99, when we look at the geographic layout of our current network, we see a couple of gaps. There are two that are mentioned here, one being the Route 99 South Kipling service. We're proposing to restore the weekday service on an hourly basis between Southwest Plaza and Federal Center Station. Again, this connects our bus system to our rail system as well. So next slide, please. Moving forward to the Route 169L, this service was when we count the number of customer requests from September going into January, February, this was the #1 request that we heard from our customers, and that was to restore their previous weekday schedule on the 169L. The 169L provides a local type service to Denver International Airport. The Route 324 in Longmont, we are proposing to increase weekday service to 30 minutes. And again, that's to address passenger/customer overloads. We're also planning to do proposing to do the same thing with Route 326, also in Longmont. And again, here we are with another geographic, trying to better make up gaps in our network with the Route 483, and that service between Parker and the Lincoln Station. So that would provide local service between the town of Parker, connecting to the southeast corridor at Lincoln Station. And then we have the route bound in Boulder. We're proposing to increase the service frequency from every 30 minutes to every 15 minutes, and that's to address some overcrowding that we're seeing. And then finally, the Route RX. We made some changes to the Route RX with the September 2020 service change, and now we need to make some additional tweaks to the actual schedule to make it perform a little bit better as far as on-time performance. So with that, I want to summarize. Next page. Okay, so with that, the overall estimated financial impact we're aiming to do is to make this a cost-neutral service change. The operator impact, it will estimate it cost us an additional 29 full-time equivalent employees to provide this service change, and this represents an annualized increase of about 73,000 hours. With this service change in June, it's June 13th, 2021, our school service or special service orders for school service would be canceled as well. So with that, I do want to mention that we do have the three service, or actually the three public hearings that we hope to even get more information, and we'll continue to make tweaks to the proposal as we normally do, and we may come back to you in the April meeting with an increased level of ask. So with that, I'd like to go to the next slide and say thank you all for your time.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Ford, Ms. Tonellis, Mr. Carter. Any feedback from any of you before I start looking for questions? Okay, I think that's where we're going to now. I see Director Broom has his hand up.
I was just curious about, from an accounting standpoint, how you add service, but there's no budgetary impact. Could you explain
that? Director Broom, this is Jesse Carter, Manager of Service Planning and Scheduling. The way we're looking at it, we are currently employing a number of operators that don't have assigned work. So when you look at, let's take for instance, the Route 15, where we operate it, but we currently have to add in a lot of unscheduled service with those operators. If we then turn the work that we're covering with unscheduled operators, and we actually provide that with a scheduled operator, we haven't employed a new operator, which is a great deal of the cost of adding service. And we aren't employing a new vehicle to actually provide that service. So that's looked at as, in a sense, a wash. I hope that answers your question.
It does. The other thing I was curious about, we've said that we're operating at a 60% service level. Does this make it 62%, or what is the impact on that?
Excellent question. And I'm still working on that figure, but to give you an idea, if I were to look at the bus service by itself, weekday, it constituted about a 3% increase in our service overall. So it's going to be somewhere between a 3 and a 4% increase.
Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Thank you, Director. I'm not sure who is first, Director Bouquet or Director Lewis?
I think Director Lewis.
Okay.
No, Director Lewis, you go for it. I saw your hand.
Okay, Director Lewis, you're up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director Bouquet. I actually do have a few questions, so maybe Director Bouquet might regret allowing me to go first. The first question is actually for Pauletta. With the listening sessions, I appreciate the work that your staff and your team has done around this. And I had a question regarding representation from nonprofit folks and the folks that they might serve in terms of participants. And then the attendees, I wasn't clear if this was 154 folks total or 154 folks attended for a session.
Yeah, thank you for that. Those are great questions. So to answer your first one about the nonprofits and groups that were represented. So I mentioned that Boulder County Mobility for All, or the Boulder Local Coordinating Council, and also the Denver Local Coordinating Council, both of those groups have representation from a cross section of community groups and social service organizations, people who represent persons with disabilities and such. So that's why we chose those meetings, because those are great groups that have a cross representation of our community and various community partners, different sectors of our community. And so they were represented in those groups. We also had some additional feedback through our Citizens Advisory Committee. And then the 155 people that I mentioned. So of the meetings that we held where we focused the discussion on the service change, there were 155 total people.
For each one of them, total for each of the sessions collectively?
All of them together. So like the 5 sector meetings that we had, those were invites that went out to specific individuals who typically work with us on service related matters. And so each of those 5 sector meetings, we did not have dozens of people on those. We had probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 external people on those meetings with us. And then the other groups that I mentioned, those all rounded up to about 155.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you for the clarity. I do appreciate it. Do you all collect any demographic data or any data of any sort for the attendees? Like, do you know if folks are current riders or if they, anything about them of any sort?
Yeah, great question. No, we know that that the people, for instance, who were on the 5 sector meetings with us, those are our partners, some of them elected officials, the staff that we work with, the TMO and TMAs, and many of those people are riders, but we don't have demographics across the board. In the other stakeholder meetings that we have, we know that they are transit advocates and frequent riders, but that's a great question. We could look at how we might be able to pull that through the next round that we do, and do some kind of a temperament check on that. So thank you for the suggestion.
Thank you, Paulette. I do appreciate it. I'd be interested in of the attendees who is a current rider versus who might just be an advocate, not that there's any weight to be given to either. Just I'd be curious of that delineation.
Thank you.
On packet, thank you for that. On packet page 33, titled Expanded Engagement Process Lifecycle, I guess a question I have, or maybe a recommendation, or maybe from the work that I used to do in community engagement. After the public hearings, it appears to, and I know that Jesse's team does this to some extent, and Paulette, I'm sure your team does as well, that once you all receive information from the public, you then use that information to potentially provide different recommendations to the board, but it's not necessarily reflected in there. And I'd love, because I know you all do it, for that maybe to be included, so the public doesn't think that we ask them to come give their input and then we just go directly to the board with the presentation that we had decided prior to asking for their input.
Yeah, Director Lewis, thank you for that. That's a good comment. I think what we could do, because this is something we'll use this, I'm pointing because I'm looking at it on this other monitor, that graphic is something that we will continue to use. And I think it does make sense between the public hearings and the board approval piece on that line, that we can add another dot or stop along the way, if you will, that articulates that. Because yes, and this is something Jesse and his team always do, what we hear in those public hearings, there have been things that have caused Jesse and his team to make tweaks to what then becomes the final plan. And so it's not like those are just canned meetings. And so I think that's a great suggestion, and we can look to change that.
Great, thank you so much.
Right. Director Lewis?
Sure, go ahead.
I will mention that in the second form, after we come out of the public hearing process, in the board paper, there is a segment where we speak to the changes that were made after we had the public hearings. And typically, I mean, you can take a look at the more recent changes of January or September, you'll see that there are changes that were made to the proposal based on either public input or more information that we gathered during that whole process. So that's a common occurrence, and that's something I would want the board to know. So thank you for asking the question, giving me the opportunity to point it out.
Absolutely. No, it's and I know that because I've worked with you all and you all have done exactly that. And I'd love for the general public to know that it's not just a vault where we get your input and then we lock it and then do whatever we want to do as we move forward. So I just wanted to call that out. So thank you for that. On packet page 33, I guess I have a question on how these virtual meetings are going. I have two questions. One, how are the virtual meetings going to be advertised? Again, I'm really thinking about folks who are currently riding and how we are going to ensure that the folks who might be impacted by some of these changes, you know, moving from 30-minute frequencies to from 60 to 30. I'm sure folks would be excited about that, but if there's a change that might interrupt their day-to-day lives, I'm just curious how we might get some of those folks to attend to hear from them. Just curious.
Yeah, so the upcoming virtual meetings that we're having, the public hearings at the end of the month.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so so those meetings we of course widely promote. We make those available, of course, through a recorded format that we then put on the board website. As far as various other folks who want to participate and give us feedback, one thing that we do is we share the information through our various channels so that they are making sure and sharing it with their constituents. We do use our network of social service organizations and community groups to make sure that they know when those meetings are happening. And so that's how we're promoting the 3 virtual meetings that we'll be having at the end of the month, and do the best we can to feed people to the channels that we have where they can always provide feedback. For instance, the email or the phone line that Jesse's team has set up.
And also Pauletta's team is doing a great job in putting together a brochure and transfluxes to go on the buses to notify folks of both the changes and the meeting dates.
Thank you. Have we ever tried to send those notices via a rider alert to let folks know?
Yeah, Director, not specifically through a rider alert. I think there's a way that we could potentially do that. I will say that you know, we've had a discussion of late about how to potentially use the rider alerts for even when the horns are blowing on the commuter rail lines.
Yeah.
That's one that we could look at. We do have a mass distribution list that we also send it out to. So tens of thousands actually of people who are on our distribution list. And that goes to a number of people cross section of the region. And so we do this in numerous ways. And as Jesse mentioned, I didn't mention some of those other channels, but we're trying to get the word out as much as possible, because the more people we can get into this process, the better off I think that our whole service adjustment process will be. So we will continue to look for ways to make sure that we're sharing that through as many channels, including through our community partners, as possible.
Thank you. And you might hear a hyper focus on the folks who are currently riding, just because my assumption is, based on what we were presented, that they are transit dependent, so they don't have any other options. And so I just want to make sure that folks are able to access the things that, whatever it is, for their livelihood. And then finally, Jesse, I don't expect you to be able to answer this question, or Mr. Ford, on the spot, but I'm curious of the L line ridership, more specifically the impact of riders with the L line changes, and the impact of ridership for the 40 as well. And then I'm generally just curious of the ridership, like how many people are we carrying per day, maybe on our rail, on commuter rail, light rail, and on our buses. I'm just generally curious of what those numbers might be. And so you can give me those three answers offline, because I'm sure you don't have them available, but I just thought I'd ask for them.
Yeah, thank you, Director Lewis. And yeah, it is pretty difficult to answer and give you the proper detail on some of those questions. We are still in around I want to say 130 to 140,000 boardings per day in the system, which isn't up or down from where we were, say, in September. We had some fluctuations in ridership, of course, over the holidays, and that's to be understood. As far as the L line service change, if you look at the detail on the proposal, it was to eliminate one trip in the evening. So that trip doesn't have very high ridership. One that I am more concerned about, that I would like to hear some input from the public, is the Route 40, because currently they may have a direct trip, whereas if we eliminate the duplication between it and the 49, we may be requiring our customers to transfer. So that's something that we're, of course, we're going to be listening for and trying to get a better understanding how folks are using that service.
Yeah.
But I will follow up with more detail on those questions.
Thank you kindly. I do appreciate it. So yeah, the 40 as well. Thank you so much. That's it. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'd like to make a note that there is not public comment available as part of this committee meeting. I believe that there is somebody from the public that is got a hand up, but unfortunately we had that opportunity earlier in this meeting and we're not having public comment in this committee meeting. However, you can address an email or a phone call to any of the directors or to the staff at the RTD main office. The main number there is on the website. Everything there is, unless you need something more, 299-303-299-6000. If you need the phone number, then I will get to some of the other directors, and thank you all for your patience. I believe that Director Bouquet is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're right, Director Lewis. I shouldn't have let you go on first because you asked a lot of the questions that I was going to ask. So thank you for asking that. And just kind of clarifying, because that was my concern too, is like sometimes you'll hear, as a teacher, I hear, oh, we have listening sessions for teachers, we have listening sessions for students, and then our board listens, and it feels like it just kind of goes, like Director Lewis says, into a vault. Can you guys just kind of expand just a little bit of, when you guys are making these service changes, is it kind of based on the popularity from these listening sessions, or is it kind of based on, or is it based on popularity of, we're getting phone calls about this line, or is there another factor that I might be overlooking with what ultimately makes the decisions in these service changes?
Sure, Director Bouquet, that's an excellent question. How we are informed about how our services are doing comes from a multitude of areas, some being passive ways of looking at ridership through our automatic passenger counting system. The other is directly coming to us via the customers themselves calling. Other is looking at dashboards provided by our bus operations and rail operations teams who are looking at, overcapacity routes and monitoring that on a day-to-day basis. Other personal observations, of course, on the system, because, you know, we're transit nerds and we look at things from time to time. So what happens typically in the public process is we get kind of affirmation as to some of the things that we've been hearing both via the phone and also directly in our own observations. So I'm going to say and take a cheat on this and say it's all of the above. You know, we learn from the customer directly, we learn from the customer through stakeholder representation, and we learn from our system itself through looking at the tools that we have to analyze our services. I hope that answers your question.
No, that was perfect. I appreciate it. And then just one last question in everyone's sake of time. Just kind of out of curiosity. So if we hear, you know, public feedback during these listening sessions, it's like popularity for a certain route, or there might be certain tweaks or certain additions to one route. Would that necessarily mean a sacrifice for other routes if we were to add for specifically this June change or June service change?
Excellent question. Excellent question. Director Bouquet, it can mean that we'd have to sacrifice one for another if we're trying to stay within the context of the budget and have, you know, reasonable impacts on our operator availability and other resources. So if the request is somehow reasonable, a tweak to a schedule, you know, those are things that we listen to and hear on a daily basis. If it's asking for said favored route to come back, well, that's different. That may actually require, you know, taking that forward to a future service change, and that may be the case too. But that's one thing that's kind of hard to explain to the constituency, and that is, you know, just because it's not something that's taken care of right away in the upcoming service change, is not that it's forgotten. We then, you know, we store that in our data bank, and I'm very optimistic and hopeful that we can get to a point where we're returning service near term. I'm hoping that what I'm hearing from the different municipalities and across the United States, that perhaps, you know, going into the fall, we're looking at more of a return to service. But it's not to say that we can't look at some tweaks to the system. So I hope that answers your question.
That's perfect. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Great discussion. I believe the Director Geisinger has her hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, bravo. These are, I think this was a great idea, a great series of meetings. I've had a lot of feedback, both among my constituents and my local planners and elected officials, and also it came up with the Accountability Committee, and I've heard it from some of those members, from Dr. Coggs. So I think this is a great process. I think, as Ms. Johnson said, if I quote her correctly, she referred to it as an evergreen process the other day. And I like that this is something that we'll be doing and building on. In that regard, I'd say, Pauletta, that one thing I did hear, you said you'd start earlier and expand the invitations. People that I would have thought would be getting invitations said they didn't, and I sent you one of those, but I heard it from a couple of others. So, you know, I would encourage that, looking at that, and also, of course, as Director Lewis was saying, the nonprofits, the writers, all of those. But you know, I think a lot of this advice on, you know, what needs to open next and things like that does come from our local planners. So I hope we can get them all included, and many of them were. I think, you know, the one I attended was well attended and people really appreciated it. I think it's worth considering expanding them beyond service, you know, talking about partnerships and some of the other things that as you go along, I think it's a good way to get feedback. You know, I've sent out to the board, we sent out the draft for sub-regional forums or local service councils. And I don't know whether the Accountability Committee is going to go there or not, whether they're going to come up with something or what it would look like. I hope that they'll do something along the lines of what they suggested and send it back to RTD. But what you're doing is a very good step towards answering the concern there, because a lot of that was about just getting feedback. So I think that's great and would encourage it. Have we heard, you mentioned vaccine distribution sites, and I've seen a couple little things about what we're doing in the vaccine world. But I don't know, have I missed, is there, I think we're giving some free rides, or they're using a space of ours or something. Is there some, could I get a quick update on that?
If I may, Director Geisinger, I'll address that question. Yes, we're working in a myriad of different forums in reference to addressing the need to get people inoculated, recognizing that this is a fluid response effort relative to vaccines being available, and there's not a centralized conduit in which to do that. We've remained flexible and agile as we've coordinated with a myriad of different entities, recognizing that there was one instance most recently whereby we were contacted and we leveraged one of our parking ride lots for a drive-through aspect of a vaccination site. That was done with the help of Mr. Stoppelkamp's team, but more specifically, we have partnered with SLC in reference to having different vaccination promotions whereby we were transporting individuals. We are currently working in tandem internally, that is, as it relates to maximizing the opportunity to have our staff, our employees, I should qualify as being vaccinated. And that's fluid, whereby at first we thought we could get a facility on site, but that's changed in the sense of having a place to store, you know, the vaccines and things of the like. So as we go through this, it's an iterative process, and we're remaining steadfast and hope to get additional information as it comes full circle in the next couple of days about what the next steps are, since it was stated that public transportation frontline employees would be eligible, you know, commencing March 5th, and we're waiting for further updates as it relates to that.
That's great. I'm glad they've got our employees commencing March 5th. It's
well, as I said, that's what's been slated as it rolls out, so I want to manage expectations.
Yeah, no, I heard that, but yeah, I mean, I think that's great information. I've been seeing, you know, that that other agencies are doing free rides and things. So if we have something to put out there, I think it's great information to put out there.
Right, and the one just caveat to that, I would like to say, Director Geisinger, we're amenable to that, but as we coordinate this in the sense that people have to be observed for a period of time thereafter, that's what I mean with the adjustment of how we're doing this going forward, because it's not as if we can just take them, then leave them there, then come back. So as we figure out how that's all done, that's what we're doing. And I want to commend, you know, Michael Ford and his staff. And I know Paul Hamilton was involved as well, as related to us reaching out to FTA as it pertains to those that are utilizing paratransit services, because quite naturally, in the midst of what is prescribed under the guidelines of the Federal Transit Administration, we had to ensure that we could deviate from what has been prescribed. And we worked on that as well. But considering the vulnerable population and what needs to happen in the observation, we do have the ability now whereby we can have a paratransit vehicle sit there and wait for said customer, but we're still working that through as we go forward. So I just wanted to qualify that. We've been coordinating with a myriad of different entities trying to figure out how we could be best helpful.
Thank you. I appreciate the update.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking.
Sure. Mr. Ford, I just have one question. You mentioned we have a limited ability to increase service due to operator availability. And I know there's all kinds of pieces in terms of, you know, scheduled hours and things, but is that a limitation right now, or is that a limitation you see more? We just brought on, you know, the operators we just laid off. And I guess I'm just looking for sort of how those fit together.
Yeah, Michael Ford, COO. It's a balancing act. I mean, we have people that leave the organization or retire, so you're always trying to keep on top of the curve in terms of resources. Again, I mentioned also that we're having to expend more people and more equipment to carry less people, so that puts a strain on the system as well. So right now, we're continuing to monitor. We continue to meet weekly to talk about our needs and project out. So we're trying to keep on top of things, but obviously it creates a stretch because you're having to limit or expand upon the resources you have to carry a limited amount of people. And again, that, plays, havoc in trying to be as efficient as possible, given that we're mass transit. So it's an ongoing thing. And we'll continue to strive to make sure that we stay on top of the issue and make sure that we have enough people here and that we don't go back to yesteryear. So.
Great, thank you. And just a final comment that I really appreciated, Jesse Carter. I can't see you now, but there you are. Your statement that you're hopeful in the next round that we'll be able to really make a significant difference, because schools will be back in, colleges will be back in, many people will be vaccinated. And I'm hopeful too that by the time we get to the August or September, whichever it is, the run board, that we'll be ready to really get up our service game. Thanks.
Right. And just to Director Geisinger, this is Jesse Carter, Manager of Service Planning and Scheduling. And just to add to that, my optimism doesn't equate a change in public health order. So I do recognize that, but fingers crossed with vaccinations and everything, I'm hoping to return service. Like to get back to something more normal. And that may be me speaking more to wanting to see robust ridership and our ability for our service to operate at their full capacity.
Well, that's just me agreeing, so thanks.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, Director Geisinger and Mr. Carter and everybody else in that discussion. I think Director Catlin wants to have a discussion now.
I'll try to be brief. I wanted to echo the sentiments that I think this proactive outreach, Pauletta, was really a good start. And recognizing that this was the first time out of the chute and changing this, I think it was good, and we can only probably get better and people will become more accustomed to participating. So good job. I also wanted to address Director Bouquet's comment. I have on several occasions over the last 3 years worked with Jesse Carter and his staff to make tweaks to some of the proposed changes that did result in a compromise or a better situation. And so I can say that the constituents have indeed been heard on, at least a handful of occasions for me. So I think that's great. Now, getting down a little bit to the minutia, I really appreciated that Route 77, or not Route 77, Route 99 was reinstated. That does provide some necessary access from the people of South Jefferson County, although there's a pretty big reach that extends beyond that I would hope that we can take a look at our flex ride system a little bit better. And then I did get a letter from a constituent who was concerned about the Route 77, which is an east-west transport from kind of the western part of the county over to the light rail station at Mineral. And they have a special needs child trying to get access to transit. And I know that that's a tough one because ridership was low, and hopefully we can reinstate that service. But Dan Merritt provided a wonderful response to this constituent that was very, very empathetic, sympathetic, and really talked about just because it was suspended does not mean it's been eliminated, and that we will try to reinstate service. And the way he stated that was just very, very thoughtful. And I really wanted to express my appreciation for his very timely response to that constituent. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Catlin. I will let Dan know.
Thank you, Director Catlin and Mr. Carter. Okay, I believe Director Sloan is next. I did see that Director Davidson and the chair had their hands up. Looks like they have both given up. So I'm going to take Director Sloan and I'll give you guys a shot afterwards.
Thank you, Director Williams. And this is really a follow-up to Directors Geisinger and Catlin. The meetings were a great beginning for something that can be a true engagement between localities and RTD. I love the question, something to the effect of what should we know about what's going on in your community that would affect our service? I think that is a start of a true engagement.
and the whole process could be, you know, Director Pauletta Tanilis had the life cycle of it, but I think it could be even broader, because once a locality has brought something to the attention, maybe it was almost there to get additional service, but there needed to be a partnership between the locality and RTD to encourage more service. And localities are getting really creative in terms of behavioral economics. And I think the locality, when they learn what was needed, could give that nudge to get additional interest and additional ridership in partnership with RTD. So it isn't just you start all over again. It's you continue on with the information you've already gathered. So it's a bigger circle than the loop that was indicated on the graphic. But great start, and I think lots of good things can happen with this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sloan. That was good. I'm going to take privilege for a second and make a comment, and then I'll see if there's anybody else who wants to speak. I'm wondering if it's possible that we listed the outreach meetings for a 6-month period so that people have time to plan ahead. I know that we list, for example, the board meetings for the whole year, and we at many organizations, you know, Dr. Cog has a calendar where they list all their meetings. And I'm wondering if it wouldn't help us if people could put in their calendar that in May there was going to be a meeting that involved their area. So just a thought, throwing it out there. And then I'm going to go back and see, I see Director Davidson decided he's going to come back again. So I'm going to yield the floor to him.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. Appreciate all the comments. Director Sloan, thank you for your comments. I just wanted to echo the sentiment that I do believe we could do a bit more. I wanted to also just throw out there for Mr. Ford and Mr. Tanilis and Mr. Carter that, you know, I have had the opportunity to speak with a number of our transportation managers in some of the cities in District I and around District I, and I do think that there's a really great opportunity if we plan ahead to, you know, expand the agenda and do some of those types of things, Director Sloan, you mentioned. So happy to talk offline, happy to share some of the ideas, some of the brainstorming that's happening. But I did also want to make sure to say, you know, obviously we're in COVID, things are tense, things are tough. We've faced difficult decisions with service cuts, and this is often thankless. So I would echo the sentiments of others. This is a great first step. And actually, with the Longmont Transportation Advisory Board last night, Director Geising and I were at this. This came up, and a lot of folks were appreciative of earlier communication and earlier opportunity. And so this often goes thankless. Thank you. I know there's still a lot of tension out there, but certainly, at least last night, we had the opportunity to hear some really nice things from Longmont about the involvement. So thanks for the first step.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Davidson. Okay. Chair Rivera-Malpiedi, you had your hand up at one point. Do you want to speak?
No, you know, I think all of the comments have been really good and the discussion's been amazing. I really want to thank our staff. The number of hours and logistics that have gone into this process is just pretty astronomical. And I just wanted to say thank you. I did attend all of the Quiet Zone meetings. I've been to so many meetings, and just the logistics is pretty amazing. And I want to thank them publicly and just say I so appreciate the work that you do on behalf of the region, and General Manager for your leadership on having putting this through. I'm really looking forward to our next step, because I think we are really moving at a very fast rate in change that is very positive and proactive. And that's all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, I do not see anybody else's hand up. I do not see any more discussion items. Is there anybody on the staff that has anything else that they want to add? Mr. Ford, Ms. Tanillis, Mr. Carter?
Madam Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
Pauletta Tanilis, Assistant General Manager of Communications. The only thing I would say to address what a few of you said is we actually have an internal staff debrief this Thursday to talk about the engagement process and some tweaks, and some of you gave us some great ideas. So the idea is to work ahead more to get these dates set so that people can plan ahead. So that is something that we'll be working towards. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Ford?
No, I didn't have anything. Thank you very much.
Okay, I don't see anybody else right now. We have no more discussion items. Are there any other matters that anyone needs to bring before this committee tonight? Hearing crickets. Our next meeting date is April 13th at the same time and the same location. I would accept a motion to adjourn before we take a 5-minute break between committees.
So moved.
Thank you, Chair. And a second?
Second.
I have that. We are adjourned at 7:56, and we could come back, I believe, Director Catlin, at like 8:01, maybe 5 minutes. Everybody good?
Sounds
Good night. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good night.
Hey, good job. It went good. Yeah.
So we will begin in about 1 minute. Okay, I'd like to call to order the Financial Administration and Audit Committee at 8:01 p.m. on March 9th, 2021. And I think that since Chair Rivera-Malpiedi and Director Williams have already talked about the protocols for this, I will suspend with that in the interest of time, just reminding directors to silence their phones, and also if they're on the phone to use *9 and *6 to mute and unmute. And if you would also raise your virtual hand if you would like to speak. The safety briefing has already been done, as you know. We have no recommended actions this evening. So we will move on to discussion items. And we have 2 of those this evening. The first one is the represented defined benefit pension plan. And our acting CFO and controller, Doug McLeod, will now introduce our guests. Please state your name and your titles for the record for this evening. Mr. McLeod, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Doug McLeod, Acting Chief Financial Officer and Controller. Once a year, we ask the actuaries from each of the defined benefit pension plans to make a presentation to the Board of Directors to give an update on the financial status of those plans, as well as the outlook for their funding. Back in October of 2020, an update was given to the board regarding the salaried employee, non-represented employee defined benefit pension plan. Tonight, we will be speaking about the represented employee pension plan. With me tonight from Gabriel Roeder Smith, the actuarial firm that's contracted with the Amalgamated Transit Union Pension Trust, is Thomas Lyle, as well as Paul Wood. They're both actuaries with the firm. I would like to mention a few things before Thomas gets started on his presentation. First of all, thanking ATU President Longenbaum for allowing the actuaries to come to present and give an update on that pension plan to the Board of Directors. And then a few other items. As Mr. Lyle goes through this presentation, you will notice there are some technical terms, actuarial terms that are included in that presentation, and Mr. Lyle will we'll translate those into layman terms as we go. So just wanted to mention that since you had the presentation in advance. You also notice that the actuarial valuation date for the financial evaluation of this plan by the actuaries is dated January 1st, 2020. That is not a typo. That is how actuaries look at things. So they use the prior year closing data, and then they project forward using demographic data and a lot of statistical information. So it is current data that you will be viewing tonight. The final thing I'd like to mention is that the projections that you will see are all predicated upon the funding of the plan that's established through the collective bargaining agreement. So you will see 2 things primarily. You will see the current funded status, and you also see projections going out. What I'd like to point out with those projections going forward is that we've only included in the analysis those funding requirements that have been established through the collective bargaining agreement and haven't carried those forward. So as a reminder, currently RTD contributes 13% of represented employees' wages to the pension plan. The employee contributes 5%. And then RTD also contributes a lump sum each year of $6.2 million. As you're aware, the most recent collective bargaining agreement expired on February 28th of this year. That was extended for another year. Those same terms apply as far as the pension funding goes, 5% employees, 13% employer, plus $6.2 million. So I point that out because the projections going forward only include that $6.2 million lump sum assumption in the current year of 2021. And then it falls off after that to be determined at a later time through negotiations with the Amalgamated Transit Union. So with that groundwork set, Thomas, please go ahead and walk us through your presentation. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the introduction, Doug. And so my name is Thomas Lyle. I'm a consultant with Gabriel Roeder Smith & Company as an acting actuary on this plan. I'm joined today by Paul Wood. He's here to help out with some questions as needed. I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen. Can you guys see my screen?
We can.
Awesome, thank you. So just to give you a brief overview of what we're going to talk about, I just wanted to point out some demographic information for you. Followed by the January 1st, 2020 evaluation results, talk about your contribution amounts, and then introduce to you some information from the public fund survey that was asked from prior meetings. So to start out with information, so from our 2019 evaluation to our 2020 evaluation, you'll notice that our population remained fairly stable and our payroll grew, and this is kind of what we expected. But you'll notice that the people who are vested in the plan grows faster while the people who are not vested in the plan decreases. These are people who are entitled to a benefit once they terminate. This unvested group essentially makes up those 1%ers. So that's about 2/3 of the population is currently only earning a 1% multiplier versus the people hired before January 1st, 2011, they're earning 2.5%. So this will give you a basic idea on how that's working now. So next here, just your summary of some valuation results, and I won't go over all these numbers. I just want to point out a couple of highlights. First of all, the accrued liability continues to grow, and we expect that to happen as the plan members accrue benefits and time moves into the future. But also, the 2019 had a really good asset return. So you'll see that there was an approximately $36 million increase in the liability or the assets on a market value basis. And it's also important to note that the plan did see a good asset return for the year of 2020, a little over, I believe it was around 14% or so. But noting that even with a really good percent return here, and for 2019, it was around 19%. So even with a 19% return, the plan only moved from about 44% funded to just under 50% funded. So that kind of gives you an idea in a year in which the asset return was 2.5 times the size that was expected to be. The plan only increased in 6%. So that's just say the point is that the plan is not going to be able to invest its way out of, so it's not going to be able to invest its way to full funding. And that's when I got to kind of go over a little history of how we got to where we are today. So over the past 20 years, it just shows the funded ratios. The blue line really is your market value, and the green line is just actuarial value. The green line is just a smooth version of the blue line, essentially. So the blue line is kind of where we're more focused. So the plan was well funded back in the early 2000s, and then the dot-com bubble happened. Had a big drop. Then there was a recovery, and the plan kind of stagnated around 90% for a while. And the Great Recession happened, and then around 2011, 2012, the plan lowered its discount rate from 8% to 7%. This is the rate at which we value the liabilities. And since then, the plan has not gone above 50% funded since 2012. And there's a couple reasons for that, and I want to dive into one of them at the moment. So first of all, I just want to kind of define what an actuarial determined contribution is, or just for short called an actuarial contribution. It's made up of 3 components. And this is like a number that we would, the actuary calculates and kind of use as a measurement of how sufficient the contribution rate is the plan is making in order to meet the plan's obligations. So there are 3 components to that. First is your normal cost. And the normal cost is the cost of accruing 1 year of benefits. So that's approximately 8.34%. So every year that passes, approximately 8% of the salary is the value of the service accrued in that year. You'll notice that from the prior year, it has gone down a little bit. And that's because you have members with higher benefit multipliers terminating and new members being hired who are earning a lower multiplier. Next is your amortization component. This is essentially the payment towards that unfunded liability. So your plan's only about 50% funded. So there's a payment towards that unfunded liability to help get it to a full funding level. That estimate is around 17.3%. You'll notice that this number also went down since the prior year, and that was due to those strong asset returns. And the last piece is your administration expense. So the cost of accruing service, the cost of administrating the plan, and the cost of paying down your liabilities. So all this together is what we call our actuarial contribution. So that's about 26% for this plan. Now, when you compare that to what's being contributed per the collectively bargained agreement, it's about 23%. So we're short by about 2.25% or so. And this is just a combination of the contribution rates, just put in the percentage of payroll. That's the 13%, the 5%, and the $6.2 million expressed as a percentage of payroll. So I would mention before, we haven't made a lot of, much progress over the past 12 years. And so a part of the reason is, when we compare the actual contributions towards what was our actuarial contribution versus what is actually contributed to the plan, the purple lines represent what was calculated as the actuarial contribution, and the green lines represent what is actually contributed. And you can see that, over time, while the actual contributions are increasing, they haven't been keeping up with what we've calculated from the actuarial perspective. For this last line, we haven't filled in that number yet, but we would expect it to be a little bit short. Depending on how payroll worked out, it may or may not be higher or lower. Next, I want to talk about the public fund survey. Last time I was here, there was some questions about how the RTD plan compares to other plans. So just wanted to kind of point out a couple of things. So this is the public fund survey that's established by NASRA. And this graph here shows the distribution of funded ratios by each of these plans. So RTD being just below 50% is in the 9th percentile down here. The majority of plans we see in the public sector, are between 60 to 70% to 90 to 100%. So this is where the majority of plans are. So RTD is lagging a little behind on that. Next, I believe this was the question specifically that was asked last year, is how does the contribution amount compare to other plans? And you'll see that 26% is almost right in the middle of the pack on this for what is contributed for a plan. So you're right in this neighborhood here, which is where the bulk of the plans are. And lastly, this is your normal cost. Again, the normal cost is the cost of accruing a benefit in any given year, and RTDs in this group. So this just gives you a basic summary on the numbers for those who like to see numbers instead of graphs. Next, I just want to talk about a couple of things related to COVID-19. And these are just things that may or may not happen. And it's just going to give you an idea of how it impacts the plans. So currently, there was some ideas that returns could be potentially lower than expected moving forward. And this would be potentially some continued market volatility. Lower returns than expected would put upward pressure on the contributions needed. Additionally, if you had smaller than expected population, or if you had lower than expected payroll growth, there would be upward pressure on that needed contribution as well. So in summary, even though the plan has been getting good assets returns over the past couple of years, there's still going to be an additional contribution in order to achieve that full funding goal. And with that, I'll open it up if anybody has any questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your presentation. I'd like to open it up to directors if they have any questions. I see Director Cook has a question.
A couple quick ones. You had a slide where you showed the discount rate, and I took that to mean that that's the rate we assume the investments will earn over time. So when you lowered it, which seemed reasonable to me, that increased that decreased our coverage at that point. Is that correct, Mr. Wood? Is that what you showed there?
Correct. So when we lower the discount rate, it increases the liability of the plan because they were essentially discounting expected benefit payments in the future. So that lowers our funded ratio when you lower the discount rate.
Right. That's just verifying what I thought was true. You had a slide where you showed the differences between 2019 and 2020. I thought is that 0.23? Should that be a negative? showing the change from 2019 to 2020.
Yeah, so it did go down 0.23, correct?
Okay, no worries. I don't mean to point it out as an error, just wanted to double check. So Doug McLeod, didn't we have a sort of schedule that Heather would show us about where we'd be going forward year after year after year, and we'd finally be on top of it by about 2040 something? Can you refresh my memory? Is that still our plan?
Yes, this is Doug McLeod. So one of the goals that the trustees had set on the represented plan was to be at least 70% funded in this plan in 30 years. And I believe that time horizon was in the 2040s, mid 2040s is how it projected out. The 70% number was arrived at because 70% or above is considered to be in that yellow area. Still caution, but not obviously as bad as a 50% funded ratio. One of the things, though, that I think is important is if you were to look at that projection going forward, is that, as Mr. Lyle had pointed out, we have a population of the employees that were hired after a certain date that only vest at 1% per year. So that means that after 30 years, they would be entitled to 30% of their pay once they retire. The other group who preceded them continues to vest at 2.5%. So after 30 years, they would get 75%. Both groups are contributing the same 5% of their payroll. So what's happening over time is those older grandfathered employees terminate. The newer employees are actually bringing back the health of the plan to a certain extent. So if you were to look at it over time, the funding requirements actually drop down because the benefit payments decrease significantly. So we kind of have this hump in terms of being underfunded for a period of time. And then if we were to continue contributing at the rate we're contributing, we become overfunded. So what we've tried to do is balance those two so that we have a target of getting to a certain percentage funding over time without unduly burdening the agency with additional outflows of cash.
For what it's worth, I wouldn't mind seeing alternative scenarios for bringing that date forward. Different contribution rates and the effect of that going forward. So thank you. Thanks all.
Thank you, Director Cook. I don't see who got their hand up first, but in my order, it looks like Director Deschel is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for a great presentation. Really appreciate it. I'm wondering, maybe I'm just missing this, but what percentage of our employees actually convert from non-vested to vested? And how does that sort of impact our modeling? And are we seeing any general trends sort of over time of the amount of employees who end up vesting? And is that going up or down?
So I would speculate, and Doug may have more information on that you're seeing that number go down because that newer group has a 10-year vesting versus a 5-year vesting. So I would just speculate that purely based on that alone, you're seeing fewer people over time. However, we are going to do an experience study this year, and we can have more information on that for you when next time we come.
Does that answer your question?
Got it. Thanks.
Michelle? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is we don't have the answer, but we're getting it.
Right.
A little bit of color to that, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Paul Wood with GRS. As Doug alluded to, you've got this benefit tier that is 1%. It's significantly lower than the benefit tier for those folks who are already vested or accruing at 2.5%. So one of the things that we would expect to see when the benefit level is around that point is a fair amount of turnover earlier in the career. And so that's something we're going to be keeping an eye out on for the experience day to see if those termination rates that we're currently using are doing a good job of modeling your population. So when we do all these projections, we have these rates that are built in there that say X% of the population that has 1 year of service is going to leave after that year. And then if you survive to the second year, then there's another percent that's going to leave after that time. And so we develop these tables of rates to model that population and to get a sense of what that churn is. And we see a lot of that churn usually within the first few years of service. And in particular, with a plan whose vesting is extended like this plan, where you've got 10 years vesting, we might even see more churn all the way up until that 10-year period, until they reach that point at which they are vested their benefit. And then maybe after that point, the likelihood of them sticking around within the plan is a little bit higher. But that's something that we're going to keep a serious eye on, because that benefit level is going to help inform that decision, not only the experience that's played out over the last couple of years, but also what do we think is going to happen in the future as we have new members coming in accruing that benefit level.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Director Deschel, did that answer your question? I do have a comment to that point though, and then I'll go to Director Lewis. You know, one of the—
I'm all set, thank you.
Okay, one of the state audit findings was that we have a difficult time retaining new operators, represented employees, and this might be another one of those factors where we're not able to retain operators for much more than a couple years. I would actually be interested to understand what, and I don't know if it would be too much trouble, what the difference in a 5-year vesting period would be versus 10-year, even if the rate is the same. That was something I was familiar with at the state of Colorado. So I was just, rather than waiting the whole 10 years to become vested, if there might be some incentive to be vested at a 5-year milestone. Just curious. And you don't have to answer that today. And I can talk to Mr. McLeod about that a little bit later. Director Lewis, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate your question because I had the same question. It's my understanding that non-represented folks are vested in 5 years. And so I was curious of that exact same thing, understanding that represented employees are vested in 10 years. I have a question and I tried to jot it down so that I can ask it succinctly, but I don't know if it's going to happen. And so, Thomas, I hope you stay with me. You spoke, I guess I'm curious as to the folks that we anticipate will be near retirement age in the next, I think it said 2040, but like in the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and what does that mean like for actual people in their actual lives beyond the numbers?
I'm not exactly sure what you're asking, but as far as like what we're looking at from an actuarial perspective, there'll be money in the plan, at least in the, based on our projections, there'll be money around to pay the benefits. So from a consumer perspective, like the participant in the plan, they're concerned about getting their benefit, right? Getting paid when they retire. Mm-hmm. So there's currently, $246 million in the plan as of January 1st, 2020. So, and there's $90 million in liability. But if you look at the benefit flows, the benefits aren't going to draw that down. So when the contributions coming in, and there's going to be money in the plan. It's just a matter of, well, can we fully fund that liability and how do we get there?
So there would never be a scenario in which someone who is fully vested would not have access to their benefits based on the projections that you all have presented today.
We do not expect the plan to run out of funds based on its current financial situation and our expected assumptions. However, that doesn't mean there isn't a scenario that does exist. So
I'll accept that. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sorry, too many actuarial words.
Okay, fair enough. One more question for you. So if the contributions would have been made over the years, okay, let me make sure I'm asking this correctly. If the contributions would have been made over the years, would the fund be fully funded today?
It's hard to say exactly where the fund would be. However, it's important to say that, every plan in the public sector experienced these same 3 major events that we pointed out that impacted this plan's funded ratio. Every plan had that drop off in the early 2000s. Every plan had felt the Great Recession, and there's been downward pressure on the discount rates for all plans across the board. But if we look at this slide, we show where all the peer group of RTD is. So you'll see that not many of them are fully funded. You only have, a handful of them that are over 100% funded, but they're further along because they were making those contributions.
I see. So what would it, what would it take to get us into, oh, you can't see me pointing at my computer.
I can see you pointing at something though.
I am pointing at something to get us into that 60, 70% range or 70 to 80% range that other agencies might be doing.
Well, I think the answer to that is always the same thing: time and money. You know, but so I don't have a contribution amount off the top of my head that would answer that question. But essentially, it would be continued contributions to the plan, and you know, a commitment to make that, set that goal and achieve it.
Got it. But at a higher rate. But you just don't know that what that would be. Is that, am I understanding?
Right. I don't have that number off the top of my head to say what does it get to this level, but it would be additional contributions for sure.
Yeah, I would be curious to know like what some scenarios might look like for us to get closer to being fully funded, and not 2040, but maybe a bit sooner. I'd just be curious to know what it would take as one individual board director. Thank you, Thomas and Paul, so much for this presentation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lewis. I also see that Director Davidson would like to speak. Another thing that occurred to me, I would actually like to see what percentage of our operating costs are attributable to these pension funds, and what, if any, has been the growth over time in that percentage as it relates to operating. I'm just curious about that. The other thing I wanted to point out before I call on Director Davidson is that this committee meeting is not open for public comment. And if you would like to provide a comment to a director after the meeting or send an email to staff, you're welcome to do so. But that I do see one person on the attendee list who has his hand up, and we're not taking public comment on this at the time. Thank you. Okay, Director Davidson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation here. I had two related questions. Just historical, and I apologize for backing up here, but did the change in the benefit multiplier from 2.5 to 1%, that was 2011, I believe, did that coincide with the vesting change from 5 to 10 years as well?
Yes, that's a part of, I believe it was Amendment 22, the vesting change and the multiplier, and then there was a handful of other things that I don't recall off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you. And then just also just a little more history. At one point, and I had, Mr. McLeod, you had explained this to me, we were at a 2% benefit multiplier. We increased to a 2.5. Where did that happen in our chart on packet page 69 there?
Mr. McLeod, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it's I believe it was right around 2000. And I don't know, Thomas, we both weren't here, but I believe, during that time, so you can see where we start out in 2000, we were over 100% funded in this plan. If you were to look back in prior years, it was still at that level. So what the thought process was at the time is that the plan is well funded. We can probably offer additional benefits. So it was agreed to increase that multiplier from 2% to 2.5%. And that has obviously contributed to some of the shortfalls that we have going forward, because we weren't funding it effectively to match that 2.5% with the combination of the market returns decreasing. A couple of things I like to point out is one of the things that you see it to the far right of this on this slide is that the reason why that line is flat and it hasn't continued to decrease, particularly in the years, beginning in 2013, the collective bargaining agreement required additional contributions. So I believe the ratio used to be the employer contributed 8% and the employee contributed 3%. Each successive year up through 2018, that increased by a few percentage points each year until we reached 2018, and we've stayed at that level of 13% and 5%. And then we also added in the $6.2 million kicker in 2018. What that's accomplished, as Thomas had showed in the prior slide, is that the required funding is about 26% of wages, and we're funding it at about 23%. So they're very close. There is still some net outflows to pay benefits, that difference between the 23 and the 26. most of that is being paid through investment earnings. So that's allowed the plan to maintain this flat status in spite of the fact that we've had additional retirees, et cetera, and other changes throughout. So we're encouraged by that fact that we've stopped the bleeding, but there's obviously more work to do in terms of getting this funding back in a better position.
So thank you very much for that. That's extremely helpful. So if I understand, prior to adding that kicker in 2018, we were looking at an eventual fund depletion, 30 years out or somewhere around there.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe it was actually in, if you went back and looked at some of those projections a couple of years ago before we instituted this additional funding, I believe it ran out of money in 2032.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Director Davidson. Director Broom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When somebody leaves RTD before they vest, what are they paid back?
Doug, you probably best to answer that question.
Go ahead, Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, Director Broom. So if an employee leaves before they fully vest, they're entitled to receive back their 5% contributions plus a small interest earning each year. I believe it's 3%. So they get back what they put in plus a little bit of interest, and they can cash that out. I believe they have the opportunity to leave that in as well, and wait till their retirement eligibility date and take those benefits as long as they're vested. So if they work 10 years, leave, they're not 60, I believe it's 60 is the eligible retirement date, maybe 65. They could leave their money in the plan and still draw benefits once they reach that retirement age. But if they're not vested, they get cashed out with interest.
Thank you. It's ironic, but a lot of new employees are more interested in getting upfront cash in their paychecks rather than paying more into their pension plans, to improve the actuarial soundness of the plan or to improve benefits. So you've got a lot of give and take between the membership of a pension plan, because the ones closer to retirement obviously have other thoughts about that. Thanks.
Madam Chair, may I?
Yes, please, Mr. McLeod.
Thank you. One thing else I'd like to just remind the board of is that all employees for RTD, whether they're in the defined benefit pension plan or just the retirement plans where RTD contributes money, all employees contribute to Social Security. So that is kind of a unique occurrence with a governmental agency. So for instance, if you're a state employee in Para, you do not contribute to Social Security, but you do qualify for the Para benefits. In our case, not only are we and the employees contributing the 13% and 5% and 6.2 million towards the defined benefit pension plan, but the employee also must pay the 6.2% of their wages towards Social Security, and then the employer matches that with 6.2% into Social Security as well. In the past, with prior general counsel, we did look into that to see if there were any options, perhaps that we could discontinue participating in Social Security for those defined benefit pension plans and take that funding and contribute it towards their pension plan. The ruling from our general counsel was that that was not an option. So unfortunately, we're contributing, there's a significant amount of money going towards both plans, but I just wanted to point that out.
That train left the station probably in the early 80s, because municipalities did have the option of being able to drop out of Social Security, and then that was stopped.
So Director Broom, was your question answered?
Yeah, that's all I had. Thank you.
Well, to reiterate what Mr. McLeod said, if you look at the collective contribution of both employees and RTD, it is pretty considerable, especially when you factor in the $6.2 million cash contribution. That's why I was interested in the percentage of the overall contribution. Are there any other board members who would like to pose a question? Or Director Broom, did you still want to pose a question? I see. your
No,
hand
I'm
was raised.
finished.
Okay, I just saw your hand was raised and I didn't know that. Okay, any other questions? Well, thank you, Mr. Lyons and Mr. McLeod. We really appreciate it. Moving on, our second discussion item is internal audit activities. And our manager of internal audit, Anne Marie Isaac Heslop, will be giving a presentation. But I wanted to point out to board members that we are taking the state audit recommendations very seriously. And one of the things that was pointed out was that there wasn't regular interaction with internal audit and the board. And this is our first step at trying to do regular updates and status reports and everything, where we are, not only with implementing the state audit activity or recommendations, but also just so the board is aware on a regular basis during this committee what our internal audit group is doing. And I would, I'll turn the meeting over to Anne Marie, to Ms. Isaac Heslop, but I also at some point would like to call on Vice Chair Eric Davidson, as well as General Manager CEO Deborah Johnson, to maybe add any comments that they would like to add. So Anne Marie, the floor is yours. Thank you.
So Madam Chair, members of the board, ladies and gentlemen, this is Anne Marie Isaac Heslop, Manager of Internal Audit. I am going to attempt to share my screen. I tried it earlier, so hopefully it'll work. And is it working?
Not quite.
There we go, I think.
There you go.
Now, one kind of thing that I need to figure out is how do I forward to the next page of my presentation. So
I believe you could probably do an arrow key.
Yeah. So I'm not really. Oops.
There you go.
Oh, okay. So, so let me start. So I'm doing a brief update on internal audit activities. What we're going to touch on today, we're going to touch on the standards, we're going to touch on current activities, and then we're going to do next steps. And I know that it's late and this presentation it's not very long. Why are we doing standards? Well, the standards were mentioned basically in the state audit, and it was also mentioned in the peer review. Now, there are two different sets of standards here. The first one is the international standards for the professional practice of internal audit. Now, these provide a framework for performing and promoting internal audit services, and they foster improved organizational processes and standards. These standards are from the IIA, and they provide mandatory guidance, the internal audit definition, and code of ethics. The second set of standards that I have is the Information Technology Audit Framework, and these are for IT audit. Now, these address IT audit and assurance roles and responsibilities, ethics, professional and personal conduct, and required knowledge and skills. They also define all the IT terms and concepts, and they provide guidance and techniques for planning, performing, and reporting on IT audit and assurance engagements. Now, the current activities, the 2020 state audit completed in January 2021, that fulfilled the requirements of the RTD audit every 5 years by the state. The audit section of the report could be found using the link that is in the presentation. There were several recommendations because it was found that RTD had not utilized its internal audit unit to effectively address and respond to organizational risks. It was recommended, therefore, that the agency improve the internal audit unit's effectiveness and compliance with internal audit standards, and also establish procedures and expectations for the unit to be utilized, supervised, and evaluated. There were recommendations in the state audit, several recommendations on risk assessment, independence, board communication with internal audit timeframes, internal and external quality assessments. And all these were agreed by the board, and with a completion date for implementing the recommendations by December 2021. Now, because of the state audit and in view of improving internal audit, I believe it was the General Manager Johnson asked for a peer review, and that peer review is being conducted by RTD, by APTA currently. The objectives of the peer review, and I want to read them out, are assessing the efficacy of fulfilling the board-approved charter goals, compliance with audit standards and practices, division reporting structure compared to other agencies, internal audit division functions in comparison to similar agencies, current employee knowledge, skills and abilities, and technical knowledge, adequacy of report documents, and audit recommendations following follow-up practices. Now, this is currently taking place, and we expect the report from the peer reviewers, and I have it in like weeks, but within the next month, I would say. So currently what internal audit is doing, we are still working on the approved 2020 audit plan. We have some audits at the top that we are working on, and we're also monitoring, still continuously monitoring cybersecurity. We have some audits that will come out fairly soon in March, and then another couple that we're working on that would be finalized in May 2021. The next steps, this is the steps that we are working on, but we will be working on this with basically the board, the general manager and CEO, and SLT for the most part for all of it, assessing the peer review, corrective actions and recommendations and implementation. We expect that by Q2 of this year. We are looking at draft risk assessment and having a final risk assessment, again, with collaboration from the board, the general manager and CEO and SLT. And we will also develop a risk-based annual audit plan for 2021 and 2022 with input from, again, the board, the general manager and SLT. And so the all through the presentation, we're sort of reiterating what Director Catlett said. We are working together with the board, the general manager and SLT in putting some of the recommendations in place and eventually improving the activity for internal audit. With that, I would say I would be happy to answer any questions that anyone would have.
Thank you, Anne Marie. I really appreciate your brief presentation, and I would mention to the board that we will be doing these on a much more regular basis, and we'll have opportunity to communicate all of this back and forth. And I think I might yield to General Manager CEO Deborah Johnson to talk about how this particular activity will be iterative and will integrate with the, just a minute, I got a text message, but iterate and we can discuss how we move forward to develop a really, really robust audit plan. And I'm going to implore upon all of you as directors that we do need to engage. And as we go through our strategic planning process that is planned for later this spring, that we utilize the information that we glean from that to really provide meaningful input to Ms. Isaac Heslop so that we can develop a meaningful audit plan as we move forward. Anne Marie, would you mind turning on your video so that we can see you as you respond to some of the questions? We'd appreciate that. Right now, you're just a gray square. Okay, thank you. I do see that there are a couple of directors.
Am I there now?
There you are. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. I'd first like
I
to.
forgot.
That's
Sorry.
okay. You know what? As we move forward with these more regularly scheduled meetings, we'll all become a little bit more comfortable. I would like CEO GM Deborah Johnson to make a few comments, as well as Director Eric Davidson. And then I see that Director Broom has his hand up, and I noticed that Director Lewis did as well, but she took it down. So let's first go to Ms. Johnson.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Isaac Heslop, for your presentation. I appreciate the opportunity to address you all pertaining to our internal auditing functions. And just as you heard from the chair of our committee, as it relates to the internal auditing function, I think basically this is an opportunity for us to have a jump off point relative to being more engaged with Ms. Isaac Heslop as it relates to leveraging the opportunity to look at our internal operations and garnering whether or not we are capitalizing on efficiencies, recognizing that there were some recommendations set forward by the state auditor. I believe that this is in our best interest as we're leveraging the American Public Transportation Association's peer review capabilities, leveraging our internal auditing functions. I think this sets us on a trajectory whereby we can enhance what we're doing now, and in relationship to the ongoing peer review, be able to garner some valuable input that will assist you all collectively on discerning what our path forward is. And so with that as a backdrop, having Ms. Isaac Heslop incorporate into her normal activities and incorporating into her normal activities an opportunity for her to come before this committee on a recurring basis will better enable all of you to have an understanding of what's happening and shape things as we go forward. So in that regard, I have been meeting with Ms. Isaac Heslop on a more frequent basis in tandem with Director Catlin, excuse me, I apologize, and Director Davison, it's late. I think we have an opportunity to, go forward and make some steps toward capitalizing on what we have here. So that's what I wanted to share, and I will yield the floor to the Vice Chair of the committee, Mr. Davidson, to put forward any comments that he has. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Director Davidson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the comments, Ms. Johnson. And thank you for the presentation, Ms. Isaac Heslop. Very much appreciate the opportunity to get this started and move through this. I do want to point out to the board, to me, this has become a very serious issue on my mind, just looking at this as a board function. Audit and risk assessment is a board function. And the 2020 state audit, I would really encourage all board members to really particularly read through pages 58 through 70, which go into the internal audit and recommendations. Alarmingly, there's some similarities to the 2010 audit. And I think we have some very serious problems in terms of the engagement of this board on the audit function. One of the recommendations, I won't go through all of these, that I would call attention to is reporting structure. And the audit function, as Ms. Isaac Heslop has noted for us, needs to be independent and free of influence. And while there can be the administrative line into the CEO and general manager or potential other avenues within an organization, the functional reporting should come into the board of directors, which is something that has been called out by the audit. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak about it, Madam Chair. I just would like to point out to the board the seriousness of this. Obviously there are some issues that are, the board needs to be involved in, to be looking at where we can be better and optimize as an organization. But there are some things that are functions that are owned by a board of directors. And this is one of them. This is one of the biggies. And we've gone 10 years now from an audit and had another audit that's said something similar. So I look forward to seeing the APTA audit. I just would also like to stress, I'd like to work with all of you to find a good solution here. And let's make 2021 the year that we solve this problem and get a good function going. And again, Ms. Isaac Heslop, thank you for the presentation. I appreciate it. I know this is it's a tough function in that there are kind of these different actors. So that's certainly not lost on me. Thank you for walking us through that. I'll yield the floor back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director Davidson. I completely agree with the seriousness of this board responsibility. And I've been trying to beat the drum for about 3 years. And I think that we finally turned the corner and have an opportunity here to really move this this responsibility and this obligation of the board forward. I know Director Deschelle had some questions about the credentials of the peer review team, and they will be providing their respective credentials included in the report. But I have every confidence in the capabilities of these folks. They are just stellar individuals in the industry, and I think we really got a great team, and they're working very hard on this. And to that point, when we talk about the reporting structure and some of the governance issues, that peer review team will be coming up with some options for us to consider. And Director Davidson and I had talked about perhaps coming forward with some sort of a resolution that would memorialize that a little bit more, but we wanted to wait until we got the recommendations from the APTA peer review committee. So I won't dominate this conversation anymore, but I do see Director Cook has her hand up. Director Cook?
Yeah, thank you very much. And mostly I just want to say thanks. And I really appreciate the level of attention and detail and seriousness being lent to this by everybody, including General Manager Johnson. I think it's really needed and important, and I feel so good about what you're doing. So thank you. I did want to hark back to the audit recommendations, which entail or may entail a modification to our bylaws and or committee charters, and we committed to doing that by the end of the year. So I know you are, but in terms of time frame, I didn't see how that's laid out. I want to make sure we're keeping that in mind. To the extent that the findings call for that, then we'd need to allow enough time to go through that process toward the end of the year. So thank you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Director Cook. That's a good point. Director Deschelle?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And after speaking with General Manager and CEO Johnson, just learning more about the APTA peer review process, I am on a different APTA peer review matter. I am confident as well in the APTA peer review credentials. I also really want to emphasize the importance of audit. It's one of the first things we learn in corporate compliance in school. It's one of the first things we tell clients in private practice, which is audit needs to be independent. And I think it is, I appreciate those who have been beating the drum before I got here. And it's past time that we are really serious, not only about making sure audit is independent, but also that we put some more, trying to not mix metaphors here, but try to ensure compliance with audit recommendations and do what we can as a board to make sure that those get implemented. Because from what I heard in the past, that there's a lack in implementation, from recommendation to implementation of internal audit in the way that gets rolled out.
Good point. Director Lewis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am actually really excited about this, this renewed energy. I think it's going to be great. I really appreciate our general manager and her leadership, and also the two co-chairs in this work. I wanted to go back to the comment about our strategic plan, because I just wanted to level set that. To Director Cook's point, we talked about a commitment to the end of the year, but I just want to make sure that we're managing our own expectations, that that we aren't going to be held to a 2021 December 31st deadline, but rather that we get it right and we do it the right way, and however long that takes. And so just wanted to say that because I think it's important that we keep saying that as we're building out our strategic plan, and we're not binding ourselves to arbitrary deadlines that might cause us to not have the best outcomes in terms of a strategic plan. And then the second, I actually had a question regarding the contracting process. And this one, I have a question because this recently came up as a concern. And so I was just curious as to what that might entail in terms of the contracting process. Like what are you looking for in terms of maybe efficiencies or outcomes or recommendations?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question. Are you talking about our external contracts and how those are audited?
Well, so on packet page 85, it says RTD contracting process in progress, final report end of May 2021. And so I'm just curious as to what that entails.
Okay.
Ms.
Marie.
Yes, Ms. Isaac Heslop.
Okay, so Anne-Marie Isaac Heslop here, Manager of Internal Audit. In the 2020 audit plan, the overall objective reads as follows: review for compliance by both parties with the terms of the contract, review of invoice approval process. So basically what we're going to be looking at, we're going to be looking at our own internal contracting process and the way we adhere to our contracting process as it is written.
Got it. Is there, with any of the current activities, what opportunity will the board have in terms of input? Maybe I can connect with you offline. I'm thinking of a specific thing that someone recently brought to me as it pertains to contract, but the process of contracting, but I would just be curious is like what, you know, when would the board have any opportunity to provide some input, individual board members or collectively?
If I might respond, excuse me, Ms. Isaac Heslop, that I would think, Director Lewis, that we could, if that was of concern to you, that we could maybe incorporate that into an audit plan going forward if it was of great interest to the rest of the board. And we don't want to get, as you said, too far down the road. So it's our hope that the results of this peer review, which should happen in the next couple of months, that we can then incorporate that into our strategic planning process and then develop a very, very specific audit plan that prioritizes those audits that would align with the goals of the agency. And then along with that, provide necessary resources and budget to achieve that. And one of the reasons that the 2021-2022 timeframe was put in there was because we're not going to be completing these activities probably until later in the summer, which would not give a lot of time to complete a substantial number of audits. And so that was kind of why there was a carryover to 2022.
Sure. Thank you for that clarity, Director Catlin. If I might ask you a follow-up question, what would be different as we move forward as a collective in ensuring that we are adhering to or implementing or executing on the recommendations that might come from our audit department?
Well, I think that as Anne-Marie Isaac Heslop indicated, this is an iterative process with the SLT and the board. And so it's not going to be just a one and done, here's our recommendation. We're going to have a discussion. So to make sure that it aligns with the strategic priorities. I might want to yield to General Manager CEO Deborah Johnson if she wants to add to that a little bit.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. No, your thoughts about how that all meshes together.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And a couple of thoughts. As it relates to the question you posed, Director Lewis, there's a myriad of different things that could happen. And what I mean by that, recognizing that there needs to be input garnered from the board relative to what risks are associated with this agency, there's a couple of steps that need to be taken, i.e., a risk assessment to discern what we should have a laser focus on as we go forward to ensure that we are maximizing the efficiencies within the agencies and being good stewards of taxpayer dollars. So with that as a backdrop, in reference to soliciting that input, there could be one-on-one interviews done with each board member area, analogous to what the peer review is doing. There could be surveys that are, leveraged as well. And that information could be shared collectively and then basically get consensus among the board about what those elements should be based upon the aforementioned, i.e. the risk assessment and how we came to that and what's a higher risk for the agency as a whole. In reference to the senior leadership team, I think if anything, it's basically, with me being the general manager CEO, having an opportunity to confer with all of you all collectively, looking at what the risks are, of course, with input from the senior leadership team. But right now, from my understanding, that was done previously. Ms. Isaac Heslop was doing it independently by getting information, by disseminating emails, and there could be something that one individual put forward, but it wasn't synthesized in such a way that would be of the betterment for the agency as a whole. So I think as we go forward, we have to have a methodology. We have to be intentional about what it is that we're doing, and getting to the point that Director Lewis raised relative to having, strategic priorities. That's one thing for certain. Doing a risk assessment, if we identify those as I envision going forward, then we could say this falls underneath the auspices of exercising financial accountability, or it falls under the auspices of improving safety and service quality. If those were things, and I'm just using this for discussion purposes relative to what strategic priorities could consist of, and that would be a determining factor to help lay out what the plan is that would be adopted by this body. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that specificity and that level of detail. Thank you.
I agree. Did that answer all your questions, Director Lewis? Good, perfect. Director Sloan, you've been very patient.
Not at all. I really feel privileged to follow CEO GM Deborah Johnson, because I just wanted to point out, not only is the audit process inextricably mixed with strategic planning, it's also part of the board's responsibility to do the evaluation of the general manager. So this is sort of a coming attractions teaser that the board will also be dealing with the recommendations from the oversight committee, and the oversight committee will be seeking the board's guidance on the evaluation process.
Thank you for those comments, Director Sloan. Are there any other comments? Well, I think that we're off to a good start here, and I'm really encouraged that we're embracing this and moving forward deliberately with our improvements to our internal auditing function. So thank you, Ms. Isaac Heslop, for your presentation and for the thoughtful comments from board members or committee members. Are there any other matters to bring before this committee? Oh, Director Brew?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a question for Ms. Johnson. The new COVID relief bill contains funds for transit. And the question is that just a list of earmarks, or is that money going to be distributed based on existing formulas?
Thank you so much, Director Broom. That is a good question, and that's what folks have been talking about. Waiting to see how it all folds out as it relates to tomorrow. But basically, as it shakes out, and Director Geisinger is smiling as we've been having conversations around this. We're not too certain. It looks as if, as you know, it's amongst party lines right now. The Democrats are trying to bring back the earmarks. So we will soon have an understanding, because you're talking about this latest round in reference to the 30.5, correct, sir? Yeah, okay, yeah. We will apprise you once we actually know. Once there's a bill that's signed by the president and we have an understanding of what that is, I will ensure that we disseminate information to all of you all, recognizing what it will be going forward.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you. I believe Director Geisinger was next.
Thank you, Chair Catlin. Very quickly, just wanted to give a quick update on the Accountability Committee. They're moving along apace now, and we've had some really interesting meetings in the last couple of weeks, especially the subcommittee meetings. The governance subcommittee was looking at our partnerships, and people from Denver, from Boulder County, from VIA, Lone Tree, there are a couple of others that spoke about, and some of our staff spoke about some of our partnerships. Very interesting. And all of these are available if you haven't seen them. And I know a number of you do try to attend, but that one I think is worth listening to. We may try to, I would love to try to bring some of those in over time to the Communication and Government Relations Committee, and start back up where we were bringing outside people in for 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning again. The Finance Committee took a first shot at Northwest Rail, had an interesting discussion, and there were no conclusions. I think they're a long way from, I mean, we'd love to have them find conclusions, right? But they did, you know, several people did say that they like the idea of moving forward with the design work. And then the Operations Committee, there was an interesting, I think a very good discussion that Paul Hamilton helped with part of, and Kristen Trussman, who is on the Accountability Committee, helped with talking about Accessory and Paratransit and some of those services and some of the things that we're doing and how we compare with other agencies. So I think, although we thought it was happening before and it got bumped, I haven't seen the agendas for next week, but I think the Governance Committee is going to be talking about these potential local service councils or sub-regional councils that we sent the draft out on. So just giving you the update. If you have questions or comments, several of you did send comments. I appreciate it. We haven't gotten to that topic yet on the sub-regional councils, so that's coming up. And just one other thing that I would highlight is an interesting thing, and again, maybe something we could bring somebody in on in the future. The Regional Air Quality Control Council, Regional Air Quality Council, I got those confused. This morning, Eric and I think several others were in the Commuting Solutions meeting, and they are finalizing in the next few months, near future few months, an employee trip reduction program or traffic reduction program that's going to be working with large employers, either over 250 or over 100, requiring, as I understand it, plans for their employees to reduce trips, which I think seems like it offers a lot of opportunity potentially for us. And I'm looking forward to hopefully finding out more about that. Maybe we'll be able to bring someone in. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Geisinger. I believe that Director Tisdale was next.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Appreciate that. I just wanted to respond further to Director Broom's comment regarding the $30.5 billion that is in the current legislation for transportation. Understand that is $30.5 billion that is to be spread out over 3 years. That was the request that we made through APTA to Congress relative to that, with about 11.5 billion being targeted for 2021 and the balance to be spread out over the next 2 years. The intent and the current language in that bill is for a formulaic distribution as the CRISA funds were distributed. So the same formula that applied there that the FTA is responsible for administering. We've been in Zoom conferences for the last number of days with members of the Transit Board Member Legislative Committee, which I chair, and then our lobbyists at APTA to explain all this and to make sure that we're getting it out right. But that's the current statement of where it stands, although I haven't seen whatever last minute amendments might have been thrown into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Tisdale. We appreciate your involvement in that effort. Director Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually just had a question, Director Geisinger, about the Accountability Committee, specifically regarding the input for some of the recommendations that might come out of the Accountability Committee. And this, I think this is probably more of a process question, but I'm curious as to how the input that you receive from other directors, I guess you and Director Whitmore, is used as you all go back and have conversations with the folks as representatives of the board for the Accountability Committee.
You know, thank you for the question, Director Lewis. And it really depends on the issue. General Manager Johnson is attending all of these meetings and is doing a lot of the updates and responses. And I think in particular on that issue that you gave us some feedback, which I appreciate, the sub-regional forums. You know, I know that, and she can speak too, but that she's got some thoughts. I've got some thoughts. I did have a conversation with Director Deschelle, who sent some feedback, and I intend to follow up with you and Director Cook, who both gave me comments. I was kind of waiting to see when it's going to get scheduled, and we will follow up.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question, Director Lewis?
Slightly. I guess I'm just curious of what the feedback loops are. Like, what is it when directors give feedback or input? How is that taken to the Accountability Committee for consideration, and also how is that communicated to other board members as well?
Well, there's been very little of that, you know, that in terms of something written up. This is one of the few times that we've gotten some feedback, and you know, it's not, we're not giving them individual directors feedback. I think it's been more of a conversation that we've been having, so I don't have a set approach, but it does go into our conversations. I've had several conversations with Ms. Johnson about the local councils or the sub-regional forums. Why don't we, I'm happy to talk to you about the specific feedback if you want. There, like I say, there's just, it's sort of a process of getting good ideas and seeing how they seem to fit with where we're going with the, you know, the agency with Ms. Johnson.
Did that answer your question, Director Lewis?
Yeah, I think that makes sense in terms of next steps. I guess I'm thinking about us potentially taking a position as a board collectively and just thinking and wanting to know what the process is for actually taking back feedback to the Accountability Committee to ensure that, you know, what is being presented is indeed representative of the collection of the board. So yeah, but we can chat offline. Thank you, Chair.
Mm-hmm. And I would encourage other board members, if they have feedback as well, if they participated or listened in on those committee meetings and subcommittee meetings, if they have comments to provide to Directors Geisinger and Whitmore, please do so. I see Director Williams. Were you finished, Director Lewis? Okay, take your hand down.
I just want to point out in terms of this discussion, and I've pointed it out before, that when it comes to sub-regional councils, there are already 7 local coordinating councils whose specific purpose is to deal with transit. They have been around for years, and a lot of them have some great ground rules. There are also about the same number of transit management associations, TMAs. The TMAs are projects of Dr. Cog, and the LCCs, local coordinating councils, are projects of CDOT. It seems to me that it would be a shame to have a third set of local councils. And the only other comment I would have on that is I wonder if there's been any discussion about having those councils sorted the same way our districts are sorted. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Williams. Director Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I noticed in today's Denver Gazette an article about how RTD is going to be coordinating its Flex Ride with Metro Taxi, and wondering what would that do financially? Is this a net positive? Is this an expense for RTD? Is this a wash financially for RTD?
General Manager CEO Johnson, do you have a response to that, or is that something we should get back to the board with?
Well, I think we could answer in a general sense. I think if anything, it optimizes our service delivery options as it relates to capitalizing on efficiencies from a financial standpoint. But I will let Michael Ford speak to that more specifically, as he and his team have been working on this endeavor to bring it to fruition. It had been in play prior to me coming to the organization. So, Mr. Ford.
Yes, so thank you. It's Michael Ford, COO. We were looking at opportunities where we can deliver service more efficiently and at less cost. And these are one of the examples that we've rendered as a pilot program to determine that. In terms of the total costs and everything else, I'll need to get back to you on. But again, we launched a couple different pilot programs with the goal to make sure that the service is efficient as possible, that we change the trajectory of how we deliver the service, and we also do it at a lower cost while continuing with the quality of service. So to get back to you on your specific point, I can follow up on the cost implications. I just don't have that in front of me right now.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. And I happen to think this is a wonderful idea, and I look forward to hopefully the program being a success and to expanding it, particularly, I believe, on some of our major routes, major bus routes particularly. And so thank you very much and look forward to the information. And good job, team, for putting this together.
Thank you, Director Rosenthal. Are there any other matters to come before the board for this committee? I don't see any other hands raised. Our next meeting date is April 13th, 2021. And this committee will be adjourned at 9:18 p.m. Thank you all and good evening.
Thank you and good evening.
Thank you.